After 10 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I shall read this from Rob because he speaks for many of us, most of my inbox when I get back after a little break. James, usually when you go on holiday, it's just the Prime Minister resigning or something like that. This time, the President of the United States threatened to destroy an entire civilization. I'm sorry, but that's it. You can never go on holiday again. Turns out, if you're interested, I'm not really built for kayaking. Although, as Keith pointed out when I shared this little nugget from my brief break a moment ago, he said, what about fast catamaran sailing? Maybe that would be more your bag. And as I say those words, it occurs to me that we've possibly been together too long, you and I, haven't we? We know too much about each other. I wonder if you can guess what we will be turning our attention to first today. Yes, no prizes. It will be the Strait of Hormuz, and it will be Donald Trump's latest intervention with an announcement that the shipping lane that he has failed to reopen or failed to bomb or persuade or cajole Iran into reopening will now be closed, but not by them, by him. Have I got that right? How do you respond to a refusal to open a channel by announcing in Donald Trump land that you will be closing the channel? Which, of course, the biggest mockery made of anybody here is the people who insisted that the strait wasn't closed. I don't know if you encountered any of these boneheads. People arguing the strait wasn't closed at all, failing utterly to understand that favoured nations were always able to navigate, as the inimitable, as the peerless Ash in Northampton pointed out to us, and if we're lucky we might hear from him again today. As the peerless Ash in Northampton pointed out to us, it was always possible to navigate the Strait of Hormuz. You just needed to be in the company of someone what knew where the mines were. So it was an ability afforded only to allies of Iran, and extended, I think, while I was on holiday, and you're going to have to hold my hand a bit this morning because an awful lot of it seems too surreal to be true, extended to people prepared to pay $2 million per boat to the Iranian regime. A toll that Donald Trump briefly suggested he would also be part of, didn't he? Is it mafiosi who say, can I have a taste? Or is it just the eternally and internationally corrupt? I'd like a little taste of that. It's a euphemism for kickbacks, for protection, or it's a euphemism for, that's a very nice business you got there. Be a shame if something happened to it, kind of behaviour. Donald Trump, am I going mad, or did Donald Trump say a few days ago, and bearing in mind I was on a what's that line from the Police song? I was on a remote Scottish loch, so I haven't been in full contact with the news agenda, but I'm pretty sure it reached me that he was going to be having a taste of the tolls. He was going to be setting the tolls up with, I don't think I imagined that. So that plan's gone out the window as well. The war appears not to have been won after all, despite the myriad announcements that the war had been won. And the Strait of Hormuz, for countries that are not allied with or at peace with Iran, and this is where things could get interesting, is still shut. Wet my beak is another phrase as well, isn't it? Donald Trump was going to wet his beak with a little bit of the money that Iran was going to start charging in order to allow ships to make their way through a channel that ships were making their way through channels through without paying shortly before Donald Trump decided to attack Iran. Where do you even start to unpick the latest? The US says it will blockade Iranian ports as the Iranian regime continues to blockade the Strait of Hormuz. The tactic, such as it is, would involve seizing control of the choke point from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, something that I don't think is going to be possible to do without a major escalation of engagement. And again, it's worth reminding ourselves that this is a president elected on a promise not to get involved in any Middle Eastern wars or any wars at all. So warships, he has said, will now seek and interdict, that's a word that suggests he didn't write this post himself, every vessel in international waters that has paid a toll to Iran. This after a number of ships were said to have paid that toll in order to get their cargo through that channel. He sent J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance had a busy week. I don't know whether you kept up to date with his movements. He went to Hungary to tell the world that foreign politicians and foreign organisations should not interfere in the Hungarian elections, while telling Hungarians to vote for Viktor Orbán, who lost on a frankly spectacular scale. And then he conducted the peace negotiations with Iran, which failed on a, frankly, spectacular scale. So if you want a job absolutely muffing up, J.D. Vance is your man. He's the man that you need. The man, of course, who was not long ago telling us that we had a freedom of speech problem in this country, while shilling and grifting for a Hungarian ex-prime minister who managed to co-opt the judiciary, the media, and just about every democratic institution in his country and still lose an election, which is something I feel we should be talking about, but I'm damned if I can think of a phone-in. It's the price we pay, I suppose, for big events that don't necessarily lend themselves to conversations. But I am going to bring you up to date a little later in the programme. Two things, in fact. Emily Maitlis will join us live from Budapest, and we will hopefully be talking a little bit about the full extent of the efforts Viktor Orbán and his regime put into polluting discourse in countries nowhere near Hungary. The ultimate irony of J.D. Vance's intervention was that while insisting that others should not interfere in the Hungarian election while simultaneously instructing Hungarians how to vote, he was also bigging up a regime and an ex-leader whose attempts to influence politics in countries miles away from Hungary are still largely misunderstood or not even known by people living in those countries. How surprised would you be if I said that various right-wing nutjobs in the UK media and political world were literally getting paid by Viktor Orbán organisations? Literally, just getting paid money for doing what they do. Polluting discourse, directing discourse. Anyway, more on that to come. We've got no idea how the US Navy will control the Strait of Hormuz. It's about 20 miles wide at its narrowest point. What will it do to ships that continue to... Will it blow them up? The reason I mentioned to you a moment ago that we used to call pirates privateers is because one person's perception of what piracy is going to be very different from another person's, depending upon whether they are doing the attacking or doing the being attacked. So many great figures from British history, the kind of Ladybird school of British history, beloved of Brexiters, essentially lionises and champions people who would be, under any definition written by anyone other than Brits, would be pirates. Francis Drake, I suppose, most obviously. Queen Elizabeth sanctioned all sorts of assaults upon foreign shipping in order to line the pockets of the British Treasury, and you know, good luck to her. But one man's pirate is another man's privateer, and you now have the United States of America threatening to undertake acts of piracy against a state that is essentially undertaking acts of piracy. Charging $2 million to travel through these waters is in many ways an act of piracy, and stopping ships that have paid $2 million to travel through these waters is in many ways an act of piracy. So what do you want to talk about this morning? Or rather, how do you want to talk about this? I've said to you a few times, I can feel a long one coming on, Keith, but alert the newsroom. I've said to you a few times recently that it's strangely liberating to acknowledge and recognise that Donald Trump is a deranged liar, and that using the tools of analysis and the tools of politics or political journalism to process or analyse Donald Trump is a waste of everybody's time. But, and I've absolutely been guilty of this myself, we don't know what else to do. We don't know what else to do. It's probably even more acute in the United States of America, where print media is much more balanced, despite the best efforts of Donald Trump supporters buying up newspapers. It is historically much more balanced than we are. And they don't know what to do. How do you analyse or discuss a president of the United States of America using tools that have been forged and deployed over a couple of centuries of relatively normal conduct? It rose to the challenge of Richard Nixon, because Richard Nixon's behaviour was so egregious and so out of the ordinary that they were able to properly chronicle it. But if Watergate, imagine if Watergate had happened every other day. Imagine if there had been a Watergate every other day and that Richard Nixon was supported by the people that owned the Washington Post. If the owner of the Washington Post, when Richard Nixon was caught up in Watergate, was busted for Watergate, had been a big donor, if it had been somebody... I mean, imagine if Elon Musk had been the owner of the Washington Post and Richard Nixon had been his favoured candidate. Would Watergate even have resonated in the way that it did? I'm not sure it would. And then you'd have had another Watergate the next day, and another Watergate, and another Vietnam. They could have had a Vietnam. They could have claimed that they won. You cannot exaggerate or over-amplify the sheer scale of how rotten everything has become and how quickly. It's why many of us are clinging to the result in Hungary with an air of almost desperate glee, because it proves that good will out. He's a conservative, by the way, Peter Magyar. He's no liberal even. He's certainly not left-wing, but he is not a Vladimir Putin puppet. He is not dedicated to the destruction of Western liberty and Western liberalism. That's it. That's the win. He's not a bloke who will seek to, so far as we can tell, co-opt the judiciary, the media, all the tools, all the instruments of democracy, and turn them into servants of him. Not even servants of the state, but servants of the leadership, servants of the regime. That's the cause for celebration. You've got the deputy president, the vice president of the United States of America instructing Hungarians to vote for the Vladimir Putin candidate. And, you know, we've got a Vladimir Putin candidate in this country who's doing pretty well in the polls at the moment as well. So you can see why people are celebrating. But we're not going to talk about Hungary first up this morning. We're going to talk about Iran, and we're going to talk about Donald Trump, and we're going to ask a pretty simple question to which I'll invite almost any answer. I'm tempted to say, how does it end? But I wonder whether really the question is, what happens next? Because it no longer matters what the President of the United States says. What happens next has nothing to do with what he has said will happen next. That is, I mean, a simultaneously extraordinary observation and a ploddingly obvious one. It's been true for some time, but it has not been properly acknowledged or understood, and still isn't. Donald Trump can say that he will be taking money from the tolls levied upon ships making their way from the Strait of Hormuz, and within hours he can say that he will be blockading the Strait of Hormuz because Iran continues to take money from tolls levied against ships passing through. He can say that he has won a war, and in the same breath he can say that the war needs to be escalated. He can claim that people are coming to the table desperate for a deal while they claim that they're doing nothing of the sort, and he will in the next breath claim that they've rejected the deal that they were offered. I mean, I know we talk about this a lot. He's gone after the Pope today. I don't know whether you've even seen this. They style themselves as Christians. They style themselves as a Christian, which is in direct contravention of the American Constitution, by the way, just another little bit of evidence of how broken and rotten everything is, while attacking the Pope, because the Pope has spoken out against war. What is the point of a Pope in the modern world if he doesn't speak out against not just war itself, but the absolutely catastrophic nature of the war undertaken by a deranged liar who you cannot pin down in any way, shape or form? Sounds like a strength when I say that, but I think we've realised now that it's not. You cannot look at what happens next. The person you have to most ignore when you address the question of what happens next is the person in charge of what happens next. Has that struck you already? The person whose words are most worthless in the context of trying to work out what is going on and what is likely to transpire is the person in charge, in large part, but as we have discovered, not entirely in charge, of what is going on. Who is the person least likely to give you a proper steer on what is happening at the moment? Answer, Donald Trump. Others have observed that the Iranian regime, the murderous, theocratic Iranian regime, is probably a more reliable guide to what is actually happening at the moment than the White House, than the President of the United States of America. And I mean, you look around, don't you, and you still see people struggle. I suppose if you were in favour of this war, or if you were a member of the Donald Trump fan club, you would be, I don't know, what would you be doing? Paying lip service to the story? And then moving on to talk about, I don't know, speeding tickets or something? And what on earth do you do when the world is in a position of unparalleled peril? And you, until very recently, like 80-90% of the British media, you were actually waving your pom-poms in the air, calling Donald Trump a genius and laughing at people who you said suffered from Trump derangement syndrome. You see what I mean about just how rotten everything is? UK media is still populated with people who said this guy would be good for world peace, would be good for the world economy, would be good for the UK, that we should be hopping into bed with him and hopping out of bed with our European partners. And genuinely, the mind boggles. And the more you pick on it, the more you understand two things. You understand just how rotten everything is, and you understand why all the people who were waving their Donald Trump flags even 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, are now just careening around the farmyard of the British media and the British political establishment like headless chickens. Cammy Badenoch doing the round of interviews this morning and inspiring a feeling very close to envy in me. Can you imagine how tranquil an existence it must be to be entirely undisturbed and uninterrupted by reality? Imagine that, to be a senior Western politician in favour of this war and then not in favour of it, insistent that I heard her say to Nick that Keir Starmer had undertaken a U-turn on the use of British bases, when anybody with a brain in their head knows that he deployed the Chilcot checklist to a point of perfection. He absolutely heeded every single lesson of the disastrous Iraqi excursion and moved UK policy according to events. But you can be leader of the opposition in this country now without having even the vaguest understanding of anything, which is, I think, part of the reason why everybody else gets away with not having to acknowledge the reality of what is going on, not actually having to acknowledge just how rotten and broken everything is. This comforting sense that normality is just around the corner, that normality will be restored. Look, it's not going to be restored in US politics anytime soon. It's not going to be restored in the Middle East, even if they stop threatening each other and reopen the Strait of Hormuz today. The economic impacts are going to go on for at least months and probably years. And yet we still live in a country, this stuff always comes home to me even harder than usual when I take a few days off. We still live in a country where a plurality of people contributing to public discourse were fully paid up members of the Donald Trump fan club and launching treacherous attacks on our own Prime Minister when he refused to get involved in this absolutely catastrophic war. So, I'm doing it again. What is it? Is it the beginning or the end of the story that we want to talk about? No, it's the end, isn't it? It's the what happens next. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. And if you don't hit the numbers now, I'm perfectly capable of talking until 1 o'clock. So on your head be it. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. What happens next? What actually happens next? Because I trust you. This is weird, and I don't want you to think that. Yeah, I know it's 10:21. I've nearly finished, all right? I promise. I haven't nearly finished, but I'll pretend that I have. I trust you more than I trust Donald Trump now. And unless you're an absolute wombat, in which case you're probably leading the Conservative Party, and you've already finished your broadcast rounds for the day. But I trust you more than I trust Donald Trump. In terms of what is likely to happen next, the words that come out of your mouth will have more authenticity, integrity and plausibility than anything that comes out of the mouth of the President of the United States of America. I mean, you know, I always hold you in the highest of regard, but that is a slightly mad moment, right? You don't even need to be an expert. You just need to have been paying attention and to not be a deranged liar. And you will have a more useful and reliable insight into what is likely to happen next than the President of the United States of America. So, what will happen next? And if you're feeling really cocky this morning, what can happen next? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
24 minutes after 10. Because I'm terribly unprofessional, I forgot to thank Lewis Goodall for doing such a brilliant job of looking after you while I was away. And it is his colleague from the newsagents, Emily Maitlis, who will be joining us live from Budapest at 11:45. I can't currently see a way for us to work our way into a conversation about the significance of this result in Hungary, but I certainly want to cover it. If you can think of ways that we could talk about it together, feel free to get in touch in all the usual ways. But we turn our attention first and foremost this morning to Donald Trump's latest stroke of genius. The response to a failure to open a strait is to announce that you are closing a strait. The idea that you punish people by copying them appears to have taken hold of the White House. But the question I'm asking you is not what you think about what's going on now, or even what you think about how Keir Starmer is handling things, which is something we should probably talk about this week. Answer brilliantly. But rather, what is likely to happen next? Because you can't trust a word coming out of the American president's mouth, and I don't particularly want to trust the Iranian regime. So who do you trust? James is in Newcastle. James, what would you like to say?
Hey, mate, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good. Go on.
I think just reading by Trump's sort of Truth Social posts and stuff, I think he's trying to get everyone to buy oil and gas off him, because he's been saying the big, beautiful tankers are heading towards the USA and all this.
You've fallen. You're already up to your neck in the trap that I just described. Aren't you?
Yeah. No, sorry, I'll come back and then...
You're right. No, sorry, I shouldn't have interrupted. No. I've been away, mate. I haven't interrupted anybody for 10 days. You were bound to get jumped on early doors. Go on, fill your boots.
But my point being was, what I think he's tried to do, in his own wisdom, is get rid of the IRGC and hope that the Iranian people can rise up and get rid of the regime. Now, he has weakened them. Obviously, he's got rid of the Navy, he's got rid of the warplanes, and he really has put a big blow. I mean, he's killed a lot of the high-up guard. They've all been kind of executed. So he has wounded them. What I guess he's hoping is that the Iranian people do rise up and get their country back. But will they do it? This is the thing. Have they got the means to do it?
This is extraordinary. This is a call I could have taken 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I'd have taken it a little bit more seriously then than I am going to do now. Mm-hmm. Respectfully, but the regime is stronger than it.
But you asked the question, what is next? And I think this is what Trump...
But I also said, I'm asking you what is next, because there's no point paying any attention to anything Trump says or does, because he is entirely unreliable. He's a deranged liar. It's a coincidence that he's achieved any of the things that you claim he's achieved, and it's arguable that he's achieved...
James, come on.
Any of them. The regime has never been stronger. The people of Iran have been completely let down by events, and the Strait of Hormuz, which everybody understood...
I don't think the regime has never been stronger, James. Come on, you're a really intelligent guy. They've been really wounded.
In the context of domestic politics, they've never been stronger.
I totally disagree. I think
so where are the protests?
The executions that they've been doing to their own people is so horrific. And when you speak to Iranian people, not people like us who've been born in Western democracies where we really don't know what.
You're going to do it again. You're going to say something from 3 weeks ago.
No, I'm not. I'm saying something now. These people have been murdered.
That was the rationale for going in the first place. It was a human rights argument to rescue the Iranian people.
Of course.
It's failed utterly.
Well, not really.
Of course it has.
Whether you loathe him or hate him, he does not want that regime to get a nuclear bomb. If they get a nuclear bomb...
The regime... This is a phone call from 5 years ago now. You've gone from 2 weeks to 5 years.
James,
No, stop saying my name like that. The likelihood of them getting a nuclear bomb was nil and is nil.
Israel, they want to wipe out the USA and they want to wipe out Britain.
Yes, and Donald Trump said exactly the same things.
Yes, but that regime keeps saying it.
But Donald Trump said he was going to wipe out an entire civilization last week, and he has the capability to do it. Iran can say what it wants because it doesn't have the capability to do it. Why are you more worried about the bloke threatening to wipe out a civilization who can't than you are about the bloke threatening to wipe out a civilization who can?
But he didn't.
No, you can't do this. You can't. No, you can't. I've asked you a question. I'm going to insist that you answer one question, all right? Thank you for ringing me from 1974, and thank you for ringing me from the end of February, and thank you for ringing me today. But here's the question, and if you're quiet for 5 seconds, you'll be able to hear it clearly enough to answer it. Why would you be more worried about a regime threatening to do something it can't do than Donald Trump threatening to wipe out a civilization that he's perfectly...
never going to wipe
forget
them out,
it.
was he?
It's 29 minutes after 10. We're back. And Dominic Ellis has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
32 minutes after 10, you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. President Trump's next tactic in his battle against Iran is a naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. This follows his claim that he had already won the war, his claim that he needed the help from allies in order to undertake the war, his claim that he didn't need any help from any allies in order to undertake the war because he had already won the war, but he hadn't yet won the war because he needed to continue the war, but he had to negotiate a peace with Iran in order to ensure that the war was over, but he failed to negotiate a peace with Iran, so he had to order them to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, but they refused to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, so he said he would share in the spoils of a toll imposed on ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz in order to ensure that the Strait of Hormuz reopened, but Iran said they weren't having any negotiations and the Strait of Hormuz has not reopened, so Donald Trump has announced that he's going to close it. And as our last caller just demonstrated, some people still think that he knows what he's doing. To which I don't know what the polite response is. And frankly, these days I don't care. I think politeness probably should have left the building years, if not months ago, but it's certainly left the building now. You want to argue that Donald Trump has got a plan? Then I have got several bridges that I would like to sell you. And because you have absolutely no clue what Donald Trump is planning, and that's nothing to be embarrassed about because Donald Trump has absolutely no clue about what he's planning, except, of course, going to a UFC fight. Have I got that correct, Keith? Is it UFC? Is it mixed martial arts or is it a little bit different from that? Going to a fight. While the negotiations with Iran were collapsing, negotiations that he has claimed on at least 3 separate occasions were already successfully completed. So he can plan that. That's about the extent of his forward planning. He can plan to go to a fight, and he can still go to a fight, even though the incredibly important negotiations are not only underway, but also failing. But the idea that he's got a single clue about what's going to happen next is pie in the sky. But we need to have a single clue. What if China tries to send a tanker through the strait and Iran say they can and America says they can't? Just think about that for a nanosecond. Chinese vessel heading towards Hormuz. American warships in the area, essentially, if they were to impose Donald Trump's announcements, which is why Donald Trump's announcements are worthless, would be required to do what? To open fire? What can happen next may, in the course of our contemplations this morning, overtake what will happen next as the most urgent question. 10:35 is the time. Richard is in Rhuddlan in North Wales. Rhuddlan, probably, is it, Richard, rather than Rhuddlan?
Hi, James. Nice to talk to you. It's Rifflan.
Oh, well, we're not even close.
You may be able to tell from my accent, I wasn't born in Wales. I moved here from London a few years ago, but that's irrelevant. Anyway, moving on.
Yes.
What is going to happen next, I fear, if the Strait of Hormuz is not kept open, is a worldwide economic crash. Now, that is almost unavoidable if it stays closed, because it's not only petrochemicals that come through the Strait of Hormuz, it's fertilizer, plastics, helium, all kinds of things that the entire globe depends on to keep their economies going. Now, whether it's Iran or whether it's Trump stupidly trying to block this area, we need it as a world to make our economies work. If fertilizer stops flowing around the world, farmers are going to stop growing their food. If plastics stop growing around the world, we're not going to be able to make anything.
But isn't this an argument for the opposite of what you're saying? There's no earthly way that this will be sustainable. I mean, even domestically, I hesitate to say it, and I don't know if we've got Simon Mark's book today. We probably should have. But even Congress, even the Republican Party would find some resolve or find some steel if those events were to come to pass, wouldn't they? They wouldn't let Trump carry on down this particular path.
Really? Well,
I don't know. I'm asking you.
I don't know. Your actual serious question about what happens next. Yeah. Mine was a global economic crash. But after that, what happens? How do I know? I don't want a world war. None of us do. But America has to get rid of Trump before he continues down this road of leading the world into, first of all, a global depression, and then, God forbid, a world war.
Is there any way in which the United States could prevail?
I guess they could invoke, is it the 25th clause of the amendment or something like that.
You mean to get rid of Trump? I was thinking more about this tactic here, whether it involves...
Oh, I see what you mean. No, I doubt it, because Iran is just too big, and it's too mountainous, and it's too complicated. I think the greatest military minds in the world would struggle to conquer anywhere like Iran or Afghanistan.
Yeah, but they've got Pete Hegseth. You talk about the greatest military minds in the world, mate. Pete Hegseth is in the chair.
Yeah, of course. Wow. Oh, well, we're right then.
I like that laughter. Let's leave it there. 10:37 is the time. I mentioned Pete Hegseth, and one of the other things that hits you when you take a few days off, and I apologise if this sort of stuff hits you every day, but when you're immersed in it professionally, I sometimes worry that you lose sight of the wood for the trees. He surrounds himself with such extraordinarily awful people that we lose sight sometimes of just how awful they are. And you can make jokes about Robert Kennedy's brain worm or about Pete Hegseth's reported alcohol dependency, or you can make jokes about the ludicrousness of the press spokespeople. And then, of course, when they turn on him, as they will, like Marjorie Taylor Greene has done, you can sort of smile wryly about how everybody gets their comeuppance in the end. But you can't exaggerate how awful they are. So J.D. Vance, sent to Hungary to help Viktor Orbán win an election, and then sent to Pakistan to negotiate peace with Iran. I mean, two failures on a sort of scale that would be career-ending in any other context. He is perceived as the sensible one in the room, currently briefing media on how he is opposed to the war while simultaneously failing to stop it. The sheer awfulness of everybody in the administration, everybody in the regime, is another one of those things that you lose sight of unless you remind yourself on a regular basis. So when your man uses the phrase that the finest military minds in the world, they're the ones being removed from the Pentagon. If America has a claim to that title, then the people who actually know what they're doing are the people who are being increasingly removed from the decision-making process. Have a little look at who Pete Hegseth has been getting rid of. And then ask yourself what's going to happen next, because they don't know. Their job is not to plan. Their job isn't even really to negotiate peace. Their job is just to keep Donald Trump happy and to give him whatever it is he needs to blunder dangerously to his next manufactured or confected disaster or controversy. I'm not even exaggerating. That's what their job is. 10:40 is the time. Jane is in Camden. Jane, what have you got?
Good to hear you back.
Thank you. It's nice to be back.
Okay, well, I'm going to go in. So what's going to change?
Yeah.
Or what's going to happen next? I don't think anything. I think he's going to keep ramping up the rhetoric, telling people that he's going to annihilate them, destroy them. This is Trump, obviously.
How many times can you say that you're going to annihilate someone before... I mean, I'm thinking of Aesop now and The Boy Who Cried Wolf. Before somebody points out that you have not annihilated them, and therefore I don't believe you this time.
Yeah, when you're a cowardly bully, you can say it as much as you like, can't you? Really, I mean, you can keep saying, "I'm gonna do this by tomorrow," or "I'm gonna do this by next week."
2 weeks, Jane. 2 weeks.
Just keep pushing it out and pushing it out. So he'll either just carry on with that, or he actually will break, because he'll be pushed into a corner, and he actually will, just carry on with the airstrikes. Maybe he'll get some more troops just to sit in the sea, bobbing around, just to show that, he's a strong man. And I think the rest of us will just continue to get poorer and poorer. We'll just create more hatred, more terrorism. And don't get me wrong, this Iranian regime are the most abhorrent regime going. But at the same time,
that's what makes everything worse. I see a little bit of straw clutching, and I think I might have dreamt it, but I think I heard an interview in the early days suggesting that if you were uncomfortable with the idea of Donald Trump undertaking this military engagement, then you must be a supporter of the Ayatollah, or you must be a supporter of the Iranian regime, which is the kind of position so desperate it could only have come from a Brexiter. But I'm pretty sure I heard it or read it somewhere, and that's what makes everything worse. The worse the Iranian regime is, the more of its own citizens it murders, the worse Donald Trump's intervention becomes.
Yeah, and I think actually, from your previous caller, we are kind of clutching at straws. People were hopeful that he could sort this out.
Were they?
But, I think they were. I think people were. But if you read Mary Trump's book about him, I covered it over the last 2 weeks, and when I finished it, I've never been so depressed in all my life. You realise that the guy is a charlatan, like just a complete charlatan. And sorry, that's my belief. I'll be careful.
Careful for legal reasons? I don't think you need to worry particularly about that.
Perhaps, sometimes I speak probably too freely. But
you're allowed to, whatever J.D. Vance may say. I think charlatan is too mild. I mean, there is absolutely no evidential argument against the idea that he's a deranged liar. I mean, the evidence of his derangement is visible from space, whether it's down to narcissistic personality disorder or some other qualification that neither of us have the qualifications to diagnose. But the fact that he lies, is obvious. You want to use a euphemism for claiming that you've won a war and then claiming that you need help from your allies to win a war and then claiming that you don't need help from your allies because you've already won a war and then attacking your allies for not helping you win a war and announcing that it's been peacefully resolved, but it hasn't been peacefully resolved. So you're going to have negotiations, but you've won the negotiations, except you've lost the negotiations. So they're going to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, but they haven't reopened the Strait of Hormuz, so you're going to blockade the Strait of Hormuz. You might use a euphemism to claim that he's not a massive liar, but I'd struggle to come up with one myself, Jane.
But the thing is, James, is that he will survive this. That's the biggest depressing thing. He will survive this, he's too well connected. He's too well engrossed. He will survive this.
And you look at the support for his actions among Republican voters, people who identify as Republican voters, and if the Mary Trump book depressed you, then I would actually urge you to go for a bit of a walk before you look up these figures, because he still enjoys relatively high levels of support, not nationally, but from Trump supporters. Because, we've used the word, and we probably were too nice. It's the curse, isn't it, of the liberal, really, to be a little bit too generous and a little bit too nice when it comes to analyse how fascism happens, because people like us sit on the sidelines going, it can't be fascism. Don't call it fascism. And then the people who support fascism are either fascists and keeping it quiet, or too stupid to understand that fascism is on the march and therefore attacking all the people saying that fascism is on the march. That's where the phrase Donald Trump derangement syndrome comes from. But you sit there watching it, and as a liberal, you sort of think, it can't be that bad. This is America. This isn't Joseph Stalin. This isn't Kim Jong-un. This isn't. Then it happens in Hungary. And you sort of think, come on. And you don't notice. So, we probably should have used these words sooner. And the idea that he'll survive, the word I'm talking about at the moment, of course, is cult. The words that we should have probably used a little bit sooner, because there's no earthly way you can support Donald Trump doing what he's doing now unless you have reached a point where you will support Donald Trump, whatever he does. This is an important point, this. You cannot argue in defence of Donald Trump now without tacitly acknowledging that there's nothing he can do, with the possible exception of some of the worst suggestions regarding his inclusions in the Epstein files. But even that you would probably be able to chalk up as fake news or untrue or unreliable, regardless of what evidence to the opposite was offered. If you defend him now, you are tacitly acknowledging that there is absolutely nothing he can do that would see you remove your support. And that, of course, is historically a terrifying thing to happen. And he knew it, didn't he? Right back in the day, right on the early campaign when he talked about shooting someone on Fifth Avenue, because he somehow understands that the nature of personalities defined by grievance and a desire to hurt others in a way that, unless you have that kind of personality, you will never, ever, ever be able to get it. That's why Mary Trump's book is so powerful, as Jane suggests, because she really, really tries. It's 10:46.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:49. And listen, we go in pretty hard on the current regime in the United States of America, don't we? But I think at least we can all agree, as with the sort of pound shop version of Donald Trump that we're lumbered with in this country, that when they wang on about how they are upholding Christian values, I think we can all agree that you look at Donald Trump, you look at his administration, and you see people who are, deeply and devoutly Christian.
I don't think he's doing a very good job. He likes crime, I guess. He hit us. Think of it. He's worried about fear. What about the fear when the ministers and the priests and all of those great people that were arrested during COVID, and in many cases they're outside 10 feet apart and they were arrested. So we don't like it. We don't like a pope that's going to say that it's okay to have a nuclear weapon. We don't want a pope that says crime is okay in our cities. I don't like it. I'm not a big fan of Pope Leo. He's a very liberal person, and he's a man that doesn't believe in stopping crime. He's a man that doesn't think that we should be toying with a country that wants a nuclear weapon so they can blow up the world. I'm not a fan of Pope Leo.
There's a wonderful film. I saw Stand By Me at the cinema last night. Wow, talk about being transported back in time. But around the time I first watched Stand By Me, there was a wonderful film. Didn't do the kind of business that Stand By Me did, called Catholic Boys. Had Kevin Dillon in it. And there's a scene, and if you went to a school like mine, which if you don't know was run by Catholic monks, there's a scene when Kevin Dillon goes into the confessional. I'm probably going to misremember it. And it ends with a phrase that became my favourite phrase for much of my teenage years. You'd get into so much trouble if you said this at my school to anybody in authority. And it was Dominus vobiscum, and then a rude word on the end of that. And I think it's what Kevin Dillon said to the priest in the confessional after he'd pranked him, or he pretended to be the priest and his mate had come in and done a confession, and Kevin anyway, at the end of it he gives away the game by just going Dominus vobiscum, bleep. And that's kind of what you want to say when you hear Donald Trump attacking the Pope. That was at Joint Base Andrews, where Trump was asked why he had attacked Pope Leo on Truth Social, his own actually, just listen to it again. Should we listen to it? I've got Ashley Northampton on the line, and he's been a brilliant guide at the moment. Let's take him first after the 11 o'clock news, right? Let's just give Ash some proper space and spare you another one of my monologues. Let's have another listen to this. No, I want the whole thing. Because this is, I mean, again, I still feel it's necessary to point this out. Apparently, according to your messages, I didn't imagine somebody accusing somebody questioning Donald Trump's ability to undertake this military engagement by accusing them of supporting the Ayatollah. You can even remember who it was, so you've got a much better memory than I do. But you still need to point out how mad everything is, because otherwise they're just going to start pretending that this isn't happening. They're going to start talking about other things. They're going to start... do you know what the Daily Mail's doing today? It's trying to relitigate Brexit. Front page of the Daily Mail, accusing Keir Starmer of taking us back to into the... I mean, who honestly looks at the current state of play and thinks, I'll tell you what, we definitely got it right by pulling out of the European Union and trying to sail closer to the United States of America? That was an absolute stroke of genius. But this guy is in charge of everything. And he just attacked the Pope. Now, I suffer, like many people born Catholic, and I know you can't actually be born a Catholic, but it's a figure of speech, from a strange sentimentality when it comes to my faith, the faith of my father. And I like this Pope. He's American, by the way. I like this Pope, and I think he is playing a blinder. But please don't feel the need to bombard me with reminders of why religion is probably a force for ill rather than good, objectively speaking, when we weigh up everything over the course of human history. I am aware of all of that. But you take your leadership where you can find it at times like this. And the Pope is calling it correctly and compassionately. And he's speaking about the value of human life in a way that, for example, many world leaders seem to be entirely incapable of doing. We haven't mentioned Benjamin Netanyahu today, and the Israeli regime's continuing conduct in Lebanon, where they are simply razing entire villages to the ground, just blowing them up. You've got to get out and blowing the whole thing up. Getting away with it because Donald Trump's pointing over there, and not being properly understood in this country because, well, I don't actually fully understand why. But I do know this. This guy is in charge of everything.
I don't think he's doing a very good job. He likes crime, I guess. He hit us. Think of it. He's worried about fear. What about the fear when the ministers and the priests and all of those great people that were arrested during COVID. And in many cases, they're outside 10 feet apart, and they were arrested. So we don't like it. We don't like a pope that's going to say that it's okay to have a nuclear weapon. We don't want a pope that says crime is okay in our cities. I don't like it. I'm not a big fan of Pope Leo. He's a very liberal person, and he's a man that doesn't believe in stopping crime. He's a man that doesn't think that we should be toying with a country that wants a nuclear weapon so they can blow up the world. I'm not a fan of Pope Leo.
Is it a week? Because I've been away. Is it just a week since he said he was going to destroy a whole civilization? Right? And to be fair, if I'm a little bit short with the caller, sometimes you remind me of my manners. You haven't really done that today with the fella that rang in first, to whom I offer nothing but love. But if you're still trying to analyse this through the lens of Donald Trump knowing what he's doing, or not being all of the things his critics have described him as now for quite a long time, for a very long time, then I think you're lost. I don't think there's anything left for anybody else to do to help you back to the straight and narrow, or to help you back to a place of comprehension. The COVID rules. What? I mean, genuinely, don't ring me on this, because there is no point asking this question, but I can't help asking this question. What? Sorry? Pardon? Sorry, what? Pardon? Right, number one, he wasn't Pope when the lockdowns were underway. Number two, what is Donald Trump even talking about? Had he been Pope? He's objecting to a man threatening to wipe out an entire civilization. And somehow he's not entitled to do that because something COVID, something COVID. And he's in charge of everything. And we sit here, again, wondering how we find our way through this period. And we do it today by asking what's likely to, or going to, or possible to happen next. Hallie is in Croydon. Hallie, what would you like to say?
There are multiple scenarios that could happen from an Iranian perspective. It's not just, we're here now, whether you like Donald Trump or not, whether you were a fan before or a hater of him. I'm British Iranian, and we are connected with lots of Iranians inside. And this is the war that everyone's been fearing. But what is happening inside is that the IRGC is weakening to the point that they're recruiting child soldiers and women for their checkpoints. They're bringing Hashad al-Shabi of Iraqi militia and other militias to actually carry tasks for them, including freelance killers. So they are running out of human resources.
It's a war crime, isn't it, as well?
It is.
The recruitment of children soldiers. But unfortunately, most interpretations of war crimes would include what Donald Trump has done as well. So again, he cedes moral high ground to the Iranian regime.
I disagree with that.
Well, no, he just does.
Because we're missing UN's actual responsibility here is completely missing as well. Because at what point do you to start the R2P, which is a motion by the UN that says you have a responsibility to protect civilians? What happened in January? And if you can go after,
well, I'm thinking of Lebanon now when you say that.
Sorry, what do you mean?
Well, who's protecting civilians in Lebanon?
I think that's for the Lebanese government or the people to really speak out. But as
Hang
Iranians,
on, why is it not for the United Nations?
Well, it's for them to speak out. I can't speak on the behalf of the Lebanese. But
we're talking about the United Nations and the necessity of intervention. And I'm just pointing out that we're living in a world where, sadly, that doesn't seem to carry the weight that it used to carry.
Yeah, it seems like.
So anyway, what is likely to happen next? In the Strait of Hormuz.
Well, not just in the Strait of Hormuz, but there's IRGC defections itself. There is an actual Iranian military.
I just want to steer you, if I can, to the Strait of Hormuz and what is likely to happen there with the twin blockades.
The twin blockades. Trump is negotiating, so let's see what comes out of it. But
they just announced that the negotiations had failed.
but we don't know why they failed or what the plan presented was.
Which is why I'm wondering today, chiefly, what is likely to happen with the Iranian blockade on the Strait of Hormuz still in place and Donald Trump's brand new blockade on the Strait of Hormuz about to be undertaken. What is likely in the context of that sort of that rock and that hard place coming together? What is likely to happen next?
Well, the Iranian army might eventually step in because they're not in this mission at all.
Right.
It's just IRGC's taken over the entire country and people, and our people are being executed, and all you guys are worrying about, and many here, is the gas prices.
Well, I haven't mentioned them today.
Well, I'll come back. It's just been an hour, but this is.
No, I mean, I have to deal with. We have to both have the conversation about the things that we're having conversations about. I haven't mentioned gas prices today. I've mentioned the number of Iranians killed by the regime. Much more. Well, I mean, I can't mention something more than nothing, can I? So I haven't mentioned gas prices once. So I'm interested in what is likely to happen in the Strait of Hormuz as a consequence of Donald Trump's latest intervention, and I don't think any of us know.
Well, from the Iranian perspective,
no, from your perspective, respectfully.
We are still going to fight. There were 20,000 Iranians turned up outside the U.S. embassy asking Trump to continue.
Yeah.
There was no coverage of that at all, anywhere. We are not being taken into account in this conversation at all.
But you're here having it now. You're making your contribution to the question of what is likely to happen in the Strait of Hormuz.
I think what will happen is they're going to fight it out, and the bigger bully will win. You can call them bullies on both sides if you want to, but the Iranian people are supportive. Majority of them are. Many are scared. Many have lost properties.
So who's the bigger bully?
Well, I'm not going to get into that argument. For me,
but you just said the bigger bully will win. I don't understand.
Killed my friend is the Islamic Republic.
So they're going to win.
I don't know.
Right.
But we will see who the bigger bully is here.
Okay. It's 11:02.
James O'Brien on LBC.
6 minutes after 11 is the time. We've got our own expert up next. Before that, Lawrence Freedman, the Emeritus Professor of War Studies at King's College London, who does a brilliant Substack. I keep meaning to tell you about half a dozen Substacks that I subscribe to. I'll get around to it one day. He does one with his son, Sam. They've both been on the programme in recent months. But the causes and consequences of Trump's defeat is, for me, by far the most helpful thing I've read in the course of the last 2 or 3 days. It opens with the line, the Islamabad negotiations were supposed to conclude the Iran war in such a way that the US and Israel would have something to show for the thousands of lives lost and ruined, the vast quantities of ordnance expended and the huge costs incurred. Their failure lays bare the extent of the calamity. The theocratic regime has been wounded, but it remains in charge in Iran. The nuclear issue, top of the agenda in Islamabad, remains unresolved. The regime's military-industrial complex has been degraded, but by the time of the ceasefire, it was still able to launch missiles against Israel and neighbouring states and controlled access to the Strait of Hormuz. The international economy has been dealt a blow from which it will take many months, even years, to recover. America's European allies are being chastised as if this whole mess is their fault, while those in the Gulf are left questioning the wisdom of the large bet they placed on the Trump administration. And I offer that up as a encouragement to you to subscribe to that Substack, because it is absolutely sensational. Comment is freed is the title that it goes under. And where is the Board of Peace in all this, asks John. Ash, meanwhile, is in Northampton. Ash, if you don't know, has been a great help to us over the years, largely when dealing with maritime mysteries on Mystery Hour. But cometh the hour, cometh the man, and it is his understanding of international sea routes, the Strait of Hormuz in particular, the pertinence of mining, and the likely economic impacts of what is currently going on that has made him invaluable in recent weeks. So much so, Ash, that I now see you quoted in other media, for which my congratulations. What made you pick up the phone today?
Well, I decided to be wombat number one and see if I can figure this out. So I was trying to do a lot of analysis when the negotiations were starting, thinking I would have a bit of time to actually think about it, and then it all went wrong. But I was working on a 14-day projection of what was going to happen. So let's start with basic principles. Definitions. area denial was what we had. Iran had effectively mined the southern end, but left a gap across the top so that it could toll vessels as they came through.
Yeah.
Okay. What Trump has now threatened is access denial. Those are two very different terms. I know it sounds like semantics. It's really not. Area denial does not account for detaining ships that have access.
Got it.
Under the terms of the United Nations Conventions on Laws of the Sea, detaining vessels of other flag states who are exercising their rights of free navigation, whether you agree with the reasons behind it, whether you agree with the toll that has been paid, etc., irrelevant. They are exercising free navigation. That is going to have serious consequences. You mentioned about China. What if they stop a Chinese vessel? I don't want to think about it, because you are talking there about the spark that lights the powder keg on everything.
But I mean, if and this is why you have to simultaneously remind yourself there's no point paying any attention to what he says in a conventional sense, but you have to pay attention to it in an unconventional sense, because sometimes the things he says will happen do happen. If he does what he is currently saying he is going to do, then at some point, sooner rather than later, a Chinese vessel will be impeded.
Yes, okay, so now we get to a next set of definitions. A single ship is not an easy thing to think about in terms of global trade. It's not like a pipeline where one person owns it, one person operates it, there's thing. A single ship might have an operator, an owner, a cargo owner, and a charterer, all that have a stake in that vessel, all with their own lawyers, all with their own insurance, and all with their own liabilities. What they've done, or what you've done by this, is you've once again shifted the goalposts in terms of who is liable, who pays for what. It's gone from, it's just adding risk and adding uncertainty.
Yeah.
That's not something that we, as maritime professionals and as insurers, and we do not like uncertainty. They were starting to price in how the charterers were going to pay for the £2 million thing, or $2 million thing. And now you're talking about access denial.
And just because it's my job to keep an eye on as much as I possibly can. Briefly, Donald Trump was talking as though he were going to take a piece of that action. He was going to take a piece of that pie, and they were going to run the toll to get. So this is again what I mean about not being able to analyse him in a conventional sense. So now we're looking at access denial from the United States and from Iran.
Yes. Well, access denial from the States, area denial from Iran. Two different ways of doing it. Okay, we now need to look beyond the Straits of Hormuz. You need to start looking at threats to infrastructure on both sides. They've talked about blowing up each other's oil fields, refineries. Yep. Again, leaving the politics aside, I'm just focusing on the economics.
What it would mean.
Yeah. You're going to hear a lot about Karg Island. That's Iran's major refinery exporting area. By denying access, the exports that had been coming out in a trickle now start to reduce to zero, because you have changed the risk dynamic of what's going on.
Got it.
Because it's not just about whether you can pay for it or not, it's about whether or not America lets you, and they have the most powerful navy in the world. So the reduced exports means they have to start winding down production. There's nothing like, you are going to have to start winding down the drilling, the production, and the refinement of these products. That's not a simple process to restart. Once it's stopped, you are talking about weeks, possibly even months in certain areas of lead-in time to get it to restart. That's then on top of the compounded issues of lack of supply, lack of ability. Yeah. The IMF, before Trump made that sort of statement, was saying it could potentially be 1% of global economic viability will be lost by this. That was before Trump said area and access denial. Assuming $1 trillion, you're talking about 100 billion lost. Think of what Liz Truss did to our economy in 2 weeks. And now amplify that across the world. Now can I bring the politics back in if I have time?
Yeah, of course you can. Take all the time you want, Ash.
So to bring the politics back in, there was a very interesting thing that Keir Starmer did as a humanitarian lawyer. He got Yvette Cooper to talk about the humanitarian corridor and fertiliser a couple of weeks ago. That means that they go through the UN's aid side. They can force a corridor through, and that can be done outside of the Security Council. So no US veto. It was a very smart move, actually. I was very impressed.
Yeah.
That works in area denial. That does not work under access denial. That's why all of that talk has gone away. Be quiet. You haven't noticed yet. People might even be sat there thinking, well, I don't remember them doing that. Yeah, that's why it's gone away. Because access denial is no longer the issue. Area denial is the issue. You've then got 20,000 odd seafarers stuck there who are going to use that humanitarian corridor for relief.
Yeah.
That's gone away. That's something I was talking about at the weekend with some other people. I don't even know where this then leads. Like, there are so many powder kegs now that have been set up. Carg Island is one. Like, invading that means reciprocation against other areas. That means production refinement. 30% of oil across the world is effectively cut off. Access denial means that we are in serious, negotiations as to what that means for UNCLOS, freedom of navigation. It's a mess, frankly. Like,
you've never seen anything like this before?
No.
Too young for the 1970s oil crisis, albeit it had a different genesis from this one. But the idea of us not appreciating how big the rock that is being thrown into the waters of international relations actually is, and therefore how profound the ripples or the waves generated will be for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, we could quite happily sit here and talk about mortgage prices as a response to this. But that's easily done, because you're talking about a global economic shock, the like of which has not been seen since the 1970s.
So the single best thing that could happen is still that Trump packs up and goes home. We return in maritime terms to where we were before him and Netanyahu launched this war. The Iranian regime is diminished and damaged, and I mean, in some ways strengthened.
Can I stop you?
Yeah, go on.
No, that can't happen.
Why not?
Iran's mined the Straits. The only thing we can do now is return to a point of view where we were a week ago.
So the Straits are less safe, of course, than they were a month ago.
Yes, because yes.
And how long would it take? Forgive the ignorance of this question, but I'm asking it from a place of honesty. How long would it take to unmine the Straits?
Well, that would depend on how you're doing it and whether Iran lets you. Like, if you're doing it under the humanitarian guise, that still requires air support defence. I found someone commented last time that the drones they were using cost millions and redepleted and stuff. That's not what I was talking about. By forcing people to the north, they're using $300 Chinese drones packed with C4. One-way trip, smack it into the side of a ship.
And they're not going to run out of those anytime soon, whatever happens in Tehran.
So,
also, reports of more support coming from China to Iran as well at the weekend.
Yes,
isn't it?
and if they trade off containers full of goods, in inverted commas, for oil access that they require, or helium access that they require for creating the microchips. Sure. Or in fertilizer. I don't know how much fertilizer China uses from the Gulf. I'm not up on that, but you're talking about a situation where we are now, as a globe, in a worse position than we have been since, like you said, before I was born. And the people who understand the maritime trading aspect of this know that pretty much the entire global economy, or a good percentage of it, is based upon the fundamental right of free access of the navigation of ships to facilitate global trade. I would need someone with some serious economic clout. Gary Davidson put out some good stuff over the weekend about where we are. That's what you need to start talking about in terms of now. Stevenson, sorry.
In terms of the ripples not ripples. Ripples is too small a word, but in terms of the ramifications and the impacts that this will have far, far, far beyond the Middle East. What then is the best case scenario for you?
Right now, the best case scenario is we stop talking about access denial and start talking about area denial again. We then look at, from a UK perspective and from a global perspective, let's leave the war out of this for the minute, opening up a humanitarian corridor exactly as was being described by those 40 countries, doing it under the UN aid requirements, so there's no veto, and figuring out some way of keeping that open for fertilizer and crew relief changes, humanitarian stuff. Let's leave the oil out of it if you don't want to talk about it. But yeah, that in itself is a huge ask under access denial. It's not even possible under access denial, not that I can foresee. So,
on we go.
I'm trying to be positive. I'm trying to be really upbeat about this.
No, I know you are, but I can also hear that it's taking a personal toll on you, because this is obviously your field of expertise and you're now applying it to areas where you probably hadn't ever imagined that you would have to apply it to. For people who don't know, Ash is ex-merchant Navy, a former officer and now a teacher and creator of training courses for merchant sailors and therefore, as we've observed before, incredibly well placed to comment on all of this. But I can hear between the lines of what you're saying, a certain bleakness.
It's not going to be achieved. It's not going to be achieved by rhetoric, and it's not going to be achieved by posturing or saber rattling or pomposity. This is going to be solved by some serious legal. And that, do you know what? It's the one time I've been thankful that they keep saying that Starmer's a lawyer, not a leader, because this isn't going to be solved by saber rat. This is going to be solved by somebody who understands international humanitarian channels and can open up a safe humanitarian corridor within that strait.
And that is probably what he is, and why you mentioned Yvette Cooper earlier, what he is turning his attention to at the moment, and why the UK has assumed a position of leadership on that particular piece of this jigsaw, and also why, of course, he's let it be known this morning that there's no earthly way he can be involved in Donald Trump's blockade.
Yeah, and that's why, because it's, you're talking there about a significant clause in the United Nations Convention on Laws of the Sea that talks about detainment of ships. Yeah.
You're very good at this, Ash. But I often say to callers, I wish you weren't so well qualified to comment on this subject. I'm not saying that to you. I'm delighted that you are so well qualified. I wish the subject wasn't so well qualified to benefit from your expertise and your insights, because I'd rather not be living through this. 22 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If you want to follow Ash on Blue Sky, you can. You go to my account and you'll see that I regularly share his contributions. And the Pope has now responded to Donald Trump. So just as you focus on the economics of it, or the realpolitik of it, or the geography of it, or the commerce of it, or the military aspect of it, you return to the rhetorical aspect of it. And you now have the Pope and the President of the United States of America, both Americans, kind of taking chunks out of each other on live television. And listen, if I said to you, pick a side, it shouldn't take you long. Regardless of what your views are on religion, one man is not motivated by self-interest, self-enrichment and narcissism, and one man is. But hey-ho, still not quite 52-48, but you take my point.
James O'Brien on LBC.
25 minutes after 11, and there it is, I think, that moment where you find yourself understanding the temptation not to look up. Oh, forget about it. I can sometimes be a little bit dismissive of people who are not paying sufficient attention to world events at the moment, but that's only because they were in favour of them. If you were waving your pom-poms for Donald Trump, or your little tatty polyester flag, or using phrases like Donald Trump derangement syndrome, or claiming that support for, claiming that scepticism about his fitness for his role in Iran was somehow tantamount to support for the murderous ayatollahs, then obviously you deserve mockery if you've now decided to turn your attention to babby washing and the price of fish. But for the rest of us who do have a proper understanding of what is going on, or who seek a proper understanding of what is going on, and who understand the awfulness of the men in charge, the temptation to move on and do something else, even on your first day back from holiday, is real, isn't it? But we can't, and nor will we, and nor should we. And frankly, in my case, although you might be different, nor could we. I suspect the same is true for Mark in Brighton, who has got a career in chronicling and keeping an eye on the news, most pertinently in the United States of America. Mark, what made you pick up the phone today?
How you doing, James?
I'm pretty good, actually. I might not sound it, but on we go.
Yeah, right. Welcome back. What's going to happen next will be whatever keeps Donald Trump in the news. Now, that may sound simplistic, but I think that's where he is right now. And I think he's going to pivot away from Iran, and he's going to dust a couple of people in his own inner circle.
Yeah.
I think he's probably going to go after Hegseth. He can't fire J.D. Vance. So
well, constitutionally.
Well, he's the vice president.
Yes,
you can't fire a vice president. Okay, but he can fire Rubio and he can fire Hegseth. And I think he's going to fire one or both of them, and then maybe Carolyn Levitt, his press secretary. That's how he's going to pivot away from, because, see, that whole thing with Pope Leo was a pivot away from Iran. Yeah. Leo was just talking about war generally.
Well, he wasn't, Mark.
Yeah. But, I mean, the thing is, when it comes to what Trump's agenda is, he doesn't care about Pope Leo any more than he cares about Keir Starmer, any more than he cares about anybody else in Western Europe. He does not care. What he cares about is having his name on everything, having people talk about him all over the planet. That's his end game. I mean, his wife was on there.
Yeah, what was that about?
His wife?
No, I was away. What was that about? Do we know what that was about, even?
Melania said she had nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein, even though they have pictures of her standing
She
next
called a
to
press conference. She called an entire press conference to announce that
she called a press conference. And what does it do? It keeps the name Trump in the news. Now, everybody in the States is saying, well, he didn't know anything about it and he didn't necessarily approve of it. Nonsense. Nothing goes on in that man's world without his approval.
Seems unlikely
that includes
that she
his
could
wife.
do that. And there's no one in the room where it happens would have. I mean, even if they were estranged from each other, then someone would have told him that the entire world's media was being assembled in the back bedroom and that they were all about to listen to his wife's contemplation of the universe. And so what then? If we broaden it out, he blames it all on Hegseth and/or Rubio and moves on.
And he keeps going forward with whatever diversionary tactic keeps his name in the news. I want to ask you a question just out of curiosity, because I've never heard anybody answer this before.
Oh, great. No pressure then.
Well, let's say for the sake of argument, God forbid somebody murdered your father or my father.
Yeah.
Would you be of a mind to talk to that person?
Well, I'm looking at the Pope on my TV screen, and I'm thinking very specifically of my late father, and I know that he would want me to, but I don't know whether I would be able to.
I don't think I'd be able to either.
I don't think I would either.
But see, that's one of the fundamental things that I think people misinterpret about the Iranian regime. The guy who's running the country now, his father was killed by Trump. And Trump takes credit for it, by the way. It's not like this is a side issue or something he's not taking credit for. And the bottom line is, why would the Iranians have an incentive to sit with a guy who murdered their supreme leader?
unless they can present it unequivocally as a glorious success. I say unequivocally, but persuasively as a glorious success. So the best hope for the world was that they would arrive at some compromise that both sides could claim constituted victory in the absence of a sort of objective arbiter. But as you remind us, the emotional dimension of all of this is going to be pertinent, isn't it? It's going to be acute, and not just to his son, because there are conflicting reports about how compos mentis his son is at the moment, but not just to his son, because the Ayatollah, the dead Ayatollah, has beyond a cult. Well, they both have cultish status among their own following, so it's an assault upon the Mad King is an assault upon the Mad King's subjects, and they feel it more keenly than perhaps people like us can sometimes get our heads around. I'll tell you what worries me, listening to you, is that it looked for a long time, and probably still does, that the best hope for the world would be for Trump to lose and claim victory. Yeah. And it looked for a while as if he'd done that, as if he'd lost and claimed victory. But every new development and escalation makes that path narrower, doesn't it? It makes that channel narrower, because without the complete annihilation of the Iranian regime, it's getting harder and harder and harder for him to be able to claim victory dishonestly. It was never going to be an honest claim, but to claim victory dishonestly in the face of evidence, it's getting harder and harder to imagine that actually happening.
Well, it makes it harder to imagine that, but the bottom line is the longer it goes on the way it does, the more he's on the front page. That's what he wants.
You can do it. I still can't. I mean, it's not simplistic any more than a medical diagnosis is simplistic. It's either accurate or it's not accurate, and my brain thinks you're accurate. My heart's still not quite there, or my emotional core is still not quite. It can't be that simple, but of course it is. And all of the evidence supports you. What does he care about? Tomorrow's news cycle. It's like Boris Johnson turbocharged. All he cares about is tomorrow's news cycle. And he doesn't, even when the news cycle is almost routinely negative, you can see his relish for just slagging off all of the media outlets, which he spent much of the weekend doing as well.
Yeah, because it serves his purpose. No matter what else happens, Trump is in the news. Remember something, or again, let me ask you a quick question.
Yeah.
Because I know you got to go to news.
Wow.
When was the last time Trump connected himself to something where he didn't put his name out front? Whether it was steaks, Trump University, Trump Airlines, it's always about Trump. And that goes back to when I first covered him, when he had to sign a consent decree for what? Trump Village. It's always been about Trump.
But that doesn't give us any real insight into what's likely to happen next in Hormuz.
Well, in Hormuz, and see, I find it interesting. They talk about this United Nations thing. Yeah. What happens if the Iranians want to toll the humanitarian shipments?
Well, then I suppose this takes us back to Ash's points about the necessity of international law and the diplomatic task of imposing it, because that would be illegal. But, an awful lot of what has gone on in the last month has been profoundly and obviously illegal. Thank you, Mark. You're right. I do have to bear. Keith doesn't like it when I scoff at the idea that we can stop worrying about the news. It's already 4 minutes late. After the news, Emily Maitlis live from Budapest, and then Simon Marks live from... Is he in Washington, D.C., or is he still here? Live from Washington, D.C. It's 11:34. Dominic Ellis has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:37. Time waits for no man, and nor does Emily Maitlis, who joins us live from Budapest, where I presume that the celebrations are still ongoing, Emily.
It was an extraordinary night, James. Honestly, it took just 4 minutes and 15 seconds for Viktor Orbán to give up his stronghold on Hungary, some would say on Europe, on the EU. And it came so ridiculously early that most of us weren't even in place for that to happen. At the Fidesz headquarters at about 9:15 last night, and we suddenly got wind that Orban was about to concede, and we rushed onto the sort of the War Party platform, and we saw the last 2 minutes of him saying that this was the end, that Orban's time has gone. And the fact that he even received praise for that transfer of power, for handing over the torch, I think speaks to just the hold he had over sort of democratic norms in this country. It has been 16 long years. And last night, frankly, belonged to the young. And we were on the streets lining the Danube, where essentially the street party had kind of pedestrianised all the traffic, all the roads, all the tramways, all the lines. And we saw these sort of 20-year-olds, maybe younger, who'd voted for the first time, wrapping themselves in the EU flag, waving the the pride flag. You know, LGBTQ rights have been very heavily suppressed under Orban's regime. And for them, it feels like a revolution has come. And it is not quite that simple, you know, as we'll go on to discuss, I'm sure. But in the early hours of last night, that's what it felt like. It felt like, you know, the fall of a wall or the end of a regime. It wasn't just the transfer of one PM to another one.
You mentioned the praise. That's built upon fears and possibly even presumptions that he would seek to resist an unfavourable result. I mean, were those fears misplaced, or was it simply the scale of the swing that would have rendered any attempts at sort of Trump-style election denial futile?
Look, to put this into context, we were expecting to attend at 10 o'clock this morning a talk about electoral, if you like, mismanagement, you know, sort of disinformation. There was a talk scheduled to explain how the results would have been mismanaged by Fidesz. And when we woke up, the fact that that was cancelled told you that actually that was the transfer of power. I think what happened was we all arrived here, and frankly, I didn't know whether we'd be sort of, you know, wearing smart suits to interview new government ministers, or whether we'd be sort of running around in trainers in case there was tear gas on the streets. I literally packed for both. Wow. And we were warned false flag operations. There would be, you know, attempted sort of pretend assassination attempts. We were expecting, I think, something out of the Trump playbook, possibly. We were expecting to see stubbornness, resistance, a querulousness, and a refusal to accept the results. And I don't yet know, James, whether it was sheer exhaustion. After 16 years, he just went, yeah, sod it, you know, I'm out of here. Or whether it was the size of the victory. And many will tell you that it was the latter, because Magyar Party, TISA, this sort of brand new sort of formed party, it's only 2 years old. TISA means the river, you know, and people talk about the sort of social media being the islands on the river. They had a very good social media campaign. But the key to that success, I think, when you talk to some of the analysts here, is that he didn't just concentrate on the young voices. He didn't just concentrate on progressives. He knew that to win, he had to go out into the rural parts of Hungary. He had to win in the place that Fidesz, that Orban had made his stronghold. You know, in other words, anyone can win Budapest. You know, Budapest always goes with the opposition. But the fact that Magyar got out into the countryside and saw these margins for Fidesz massively slashed. So there was one sort of little regional town where Orban won by, I think, 50% share of the vote last time, and that was slashed to 4% this time. In other words, he ran a campaign that was much more focused on economics, cost of living, affordability, all the things we talk about here, all the things we talk about, you know, in the US as well. He didn't talk about foreign policy, which was what Orban wanted to focus on. He just said, are your taxes going up? Is your cost of living going down? Are things much less affordable now than they used to be? And that was how he got many from the older generation, many particularly sort of traditional conservative voters to say, yeah, we're done with this. So I think it was a much broader coalition than you would have got from the sense on the streets last night, where it was the young, it was the partiers, it was the people who frankly want to see a 180-degree turn in Hungary, not just sort of economically, but culturally in terms of their alliances and allegiances to the EU. But I think he built this coalition, which was a bit more staid, frankly, and I think that was how he won.
That makes sense, because I knew that he hadn't really said anything at all about gay rights, even though you mentioned pride flags on the streets of Budapest. So he's walked a bit of a tightrope, generationally speaking.
Look, I think today belongs to the victor, clearly, and it is amazing to see the hope that this is giving to many people in the country right now. So I don't want to detract from that. But if you ask people what they like about Peter Magyar, there's this sort of odd furrowed brow expression, because Magyar he's not Mamdani. He's not somebody who's coming in offering sort of extraordinary change in terms of the stuff that you were talking about, the gay rights or even immigration. He belonged to Fidesz. He belonged to Orban's party. And I think certainly some of his domestic policies will probably be a continuation of what is essentially a centre-right party. I mean, where he will be different is in terms of his rapprochement with the EU, and presumably in just managing to get the EU now to release funds that they have been withholding, that they have frozen up till now because they didn't like Orban's reforms to the judiciary, to the rule of law. They didn't like his backsliding on democracy, to be frank. And so I think that is a real new start for Hungary. But I'd caution a bit. You know, this is a man who has also faced allegations from his ex-wife, his former wife, of domestic abuse. Now, those have not gone through a court. There is no external evidence of that. And you could say, well, you know, this is part of a political campaign against him. That's what many of his supporters believe. But you know, people will have to get used to the man that is now at the centre of political Hungary, because I think in people's minds, what they were doing was getting rid of Orban.
Yes.
This was an Orban out election. And now they've got to look at what is coming through the door and saying, well, what have we projected upon him? And what is he actually promising? And I think that is still very much in the balance.
And the breach with Fidesz, I think, was not policy-based, was it? It was an outrage at the pardoning of a man who had covered up a child sex abuse scandal when he was running children's homes. So people can draw whatever parallels they want with other political regimes and administrations. But things we can say with relative confidence: good news for the EU, good news for Ukraine, bad news for Vladimir Putin.
And probably bad news for Trump and Vance. I mean, when I was asking whether Vance's visit earlier this week made an impact, or I should say last week made an impact, I was told, with the greatest respect, nobody knows who JD Vance is here. You know, and it was put to me that if it had been that Orban, rather than being delighted that JD Vance had come, was actually slightly disappointed that it hadn't been Trump. In other words, they got the mini-me, and nobody really knew Vance. Nobody really understood what he was doing. I think Trump, I've heard, could have, you know, not changed the result, but could have shifted the numbers a bit in Orban's favour. Vance was a sort of, a nothing burger for many.
Well, yeah, and looking at the international dimension, I think he needs 2/3, doesn't he, in the House to undertake constitutional change. Therefore, so he could have been in power but unable to undo what Orban has done. I mean, so a Trump endorsement might have been enough to tip the balances, enough to avoid that. So that possibly explains why he decided to walk the plank when he walked the plank.
Right. I think that was the fear that many had, that Teaser would get over the line but not have that 2/3 majority, not even possibly be able to govern alone. They'd have to form some kind of slightly dodgy coalition with, you know, other parties that might have pulled in different directions. So the fact that this was an overwhelming victory for Teaser, an overwhelming victory for Magyar, really gives him a clean slate. And I guess if you were part of the new generation now, you'd be saying he should listen to us. right? This is his chance. He can forget all the Orban stuff. He doesn't need the Fidesz stuff. He should listen to us and take the country in a brand new direction, because this is what we've been crying out for. And the fact he has the mandate to pretty much do what he wants. I mean, you talked about constitutional reforms. One of the things he wants to do is to end the ability to keep running for parliament, as Viktor Orbán did. He wants to put a term limit on sort of 2 terms, i.e. 8 years. I mean, Viktor Orbán has not only served the last 16, but actually he served 4 previous to that, between 98 and 2002. So, he's had 20 years in power. I mean, this is sort of dictator length, stays. And I think Magyar is saying, we need to sort that out, make sure that can't happen again.
Emily Maitlis, thank you. Live in Budapest, the co-host of the Newsagents. They're providing first hand and, as ever, first-class analysis. And just something I'd missed that I should mention. I'm told that he did in his speech last night, Peter Magyar, having not made any particular play with regards to gay rights, he did say where you can love. He wants Hungary to become a country where you can love who you want to love. So a little nod there, hopefully towards progressiveness. 11:49 is the time. Simon Marks up next.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 11:53, or it's T-minus 187. It's 187 minutes until Donald Trump's blockade of Iranian ports is scheduled to begin. That's 3 p.m. UK time. It's a week since I spoke to Simon Marks. During that time, the war has been won, lost, won, lost, won, lost, won, and lost, and put on hold. And the negotiations have succeeded, failed, succeeded, failed, succeeded, failed, succeeded, failed, and never took place in the first place. Have I got that more or less right, Simon?
I think more or less right, James. I mean, I think we've entered, in the days since you and I last were together there in Leicester Square about 10 days ago, I think we've entered a new phase in the Trump presidency. And it is a phase in which the question is going to become unavoidable for figures like Vice President J.D. Vance and other senior figures in the administration, relating to whether the president is mentally capable of continuing in the job. I mean, the behaviour that we have witnessed since you and I both decided to take a week off is absolutely staggering. It has featured just in the last few hours a remarkable, aggressive ad hominem attack on Pope Leo, who of course has responded within the last few hours, saying that he's not looking for a fight with the Trump administration, but certainly is not going to stop speaking out about the bellicose nature of this particular president. But that blockade is in and of itself the clearest example yet of the extent to which this president has lost the plot. The Strait of Hormuz was open to shipping before President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu decided to engage in what appears to have been a completely illegal war on Iran. Illegal to the point where European leaders, including the Prime Minister, say they will not get involved directly in the conflict and give President Trump what he wants from them. And now we're in a situation where President Trump is about to launch a US naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, the same Strait of Hormuz that he was determined to liberate when the Iranians said that they were going to blockade it, but also the same Strait of Hormuz that last week, on several occasions, the president said was no concern to the United States, didn't trouble him. Such a paltry amount of oil used in the United States passed through that strategic waterway that it was up to other countries to figure out how they were going to liberate the Strait of Hormuz. This is completely strategy-free now. It has been from February the 28th, the moment when the conflict was ignited. J.D. Vance did his best, I think, in Islamabad over the weekend, but then was completely hung out to dry by the President of the United States, because Vance said, even though there'd been no agreement, the United States was hoping that over the course of an unclear period of time, the Iranians were going to understand that what the United States had presented was a final and complete offer to them. He was giving those conversations a window for more oxygen and more time to try and bear fruit. And what did Donald Trump do back in the United States, where, of course, he could have spent the weekend at the White House in the Situation Room, observing the talks at close hand and staying very much in touch with them minute by minute, second by second, but instead boarded Air Force One and flew to Miami to attend a UFC bout, one of those ultimate fighting contests that he so enjoys. So what did he do to upend J.D. Vance? He suddenly announces this naval blockade, which makes no sense, has no legal basis, and doesn't appear to have any international support other than what we're hearing from Israel and Saudi Arabia.
I mean, I hesitate to do this, but we circle back once again to the question of what it will take for the people around him to act. Because, I mean, there are two things that could happen now. They could carry on doing what they've always done, i.e. sweet FA, or they could finally find some backbone. And the longer it goes on, oddly, the less likely it seems to me that backbone will suddenly appear.
Well, I think that there are many people that face questions, including the American journalism crew here. I mean, are we going to get to the point where J.D. Vance is asked by any interviewer in the United States whether he has considered invoking the 25th Amendment of the Constitution to declare the president no longer capable of performing his duties? And if he hasn't given that any thought, why not? I mean, we haven't seen that question yet being posed to the Vice President of the United States. The Vice President finds himself in a very difficult position, of course, because even if he was thinking this can't go on the way it's going at the moment, we are heading for an absolutely crushing defeat in midterm elections this November. Now, even waging rhetorical war on the Pope at the very moment J.D. Vance is preparing to publish a second autobiography all about his journey towards becoming a practicing Catholic in the United States. I mean, so that's another issue for Vance to have to deal with. But the difficulty that he faces, of course, is that President Trump has surrounded himself with sycophants and entirely pliant members of his cabinet, all of whom have poured praise on him in every single one of those televised cabinet meetings that we've watched, and none of whom has got the backbone, it would appear at the moment, to stand up to him. So they find themselves now on a roller coaster, and it's definitely heading downhill currently with those midterm elections 7 months away, and the president taking action in the Gulf, this blockade of the Strait of Hormuz that is guaranteed to send petrol prices at the pumps all over the United States soaring once again.
If we were to seek a summation with regards to the situation on the ground, or rather on the water in the Strait of Hormuz, nobody knows what's going to happen next, but only Donald Trump doesn't care.
Well, Donald Trump cares about one thing, and that became clear over the weekend. He simply wants Iran to cut him in on its oil. He wants to filch Iran's oil in exactly the same way as he's filched Venezuela's oil. He thought this was all going to be as easy as Venezuela over in a weekend. That was the bill of goods that was sold to him by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It hasn't turned out this way, but time and again he says, I just want the oil. I mean, words to those effect. And that's what he's after. And this is an effort to hold the Iranian regime basically to ransom, the brutal, murderous regime that he went to war saying that he wanted the Iranian public to rise up and replace. Now is the time for action, except we don't hear anything about that anymore. No. What he wants is the regime leaders to come to terms with him like Delcy Rodriguez did in Venezuela and cut him and American companies in on Iran's oil riches. That is what this is all about. And that's why there's a problem between him and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, because Netanyahu wants the regime gone. The Saudis want the regime gone. Donald Trump wants to cut a deal with the regime, and so far they are not responding to those desires in the manner in which he wants to see.
I have got one more question, but I'm looking at the clock and it'll have to wait for our next conversation, which hopefully will be soon. Simon Marks, thank you, I think. It's 12:01.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Time now is 5 minutes after 12. The inquiry into those hideous killings in Southport is reporting back at the moment for the first time at Liverpool Town Hall. We'll catch up with our correspondent in town towards the end of this hour, when not only has the conference concluded, but also a little bit of time to digest what has been discovered and reported. A couple of you pointing out that today has been like a greatest hits when it comes to contributors. We had Ash, who's become one of our favourite contributors in recent weeks. Ash in Northampton. We had Mark Riley down in Brighton. Simon Marks on the programme. Emily Maitlis joining us live from Budapest, and someone pointed out the only person missing is Peter Gagan, which isn't quite true. We've got a few more irons in our golf bag. But Peter's colleague Dan Nolan will be joining us at about 12:30 to have a look at the impact of that Hungarian election result on what I guess you could only really describe as the fascist adjacent ecosystem that extends far beyond Budapest, but which has been largely bankrolled by Viktor Orbán. You may not know this, but the headline under which Democracy Now! Has reported this phenomenon at the beginning of this month was "What happens to Britain's radical right if Orbán loses?" And the ideological network that he has helped build in the UK is the subject to which Dan Nolan will turn his attention in about 25 minutes' time. Before that, have a listen to the Prime Minister. You just heard it in the news bulletin a moment ago, and it is his conduct and performance that we will turn our attention to next.
Our focus in the last few weeks has been on getting the Strait of Hormuz open, because all the time it's not open for free navigation. That is impacting our economy and our energy bills. And it's my job to protect the British public from that, and that's why we're working with a number of countries, over 30 now across the world.
And I think, look, the phone-in I want to have now, and you can jump in early if you want, is about whether or not, and I'm going to be quite, what's the word that I want, subjective here, whether or not Keir Starmer's extraordinary performance since this war started will have any bearing whatsoever upon his popularity. I'm glad, and I know that some of you were very cross with me at the time, I'm glad that I was unstinting in my criticism of the Prime Minister just 2 or 3 months ago, and I stand by every single syllable of what I said at the time, except obviously the idea that he was likely to be toppled sooner rather than later. I don't know whether I still stand by that anymore, and it will depend largely on the results of the council elections in May, although even if they are a disaster for Labour, I'm not sure that the ground is quite right for a leadership challenge at the moment. But I stand by every detail of my criticism of his performance and my disillusionment as well with elements of it. But I'm in a rather different place now. I am absolutely overcome with relief that Keir Starmer was the UK Prime Minister when Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump started this hideous war. I truly can't imagine any Prime Minister in living memory having handled things rather better. He has performed infinitely better than previous Labour Prime Ministers, most obviously Tony Blair, when the call comes to help support an ill-advised adventure in the Middle East. And you know how some Tory Prime Ministers would have performed, because they've told you. Boris Johnson was at the front of the queue of people explaining that Donald Trump was going to be brilliant for Britain, that Donald Trump was going to make the world a safer place, that Donald Trump was going to be a passenger of peace, all of those things. Cami Badenoch almost spoke so quickly she almost tripped over her own feet when she was coming out to talk about how we should be completely supportive of Donald Trump's war against Iran. I think I heard her this morning say that she didn't mean we should do anything. She just meant we should say more. And you sort of think, I've said it before and I'll say it again, there is a feeling very close to envy when you look at somebody whose existence is so undisturbed by reality. If it's your Uncle Keith on Facebook, it's just mildly frustrating. But if it's the leader of His Majesty's opposition presenting a view of the world that seems entirely unaffected, entirely undisturbed by observable reality, not least the fact that her party was in charge for 14 of the last 16 years. But hey-ho, on we go. She was absolutely adamant that Keir Starmer should have been going into war. And then she claims he committed a U-turn when he refused to allow access to our bases for launching the war, but allowed access to our bases for protecting our allies from the retaliation to the war. I mean, I used to think that was quite difficult to understand. And I'm going to very cautiously suggest that for people on both ends of the political spectrum, it still is quite difficult to understand. But it really shouldn't be. What happened was this. Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump launched a war that had absolutely no justification. It would probably be concluded soonish, under international law. They probably didn't even agree with each other why they were doing it, and Marco Rubio couldn't even agree with himself about whether or not it had been undertaken as a consequence of Trump not being able to stop Netanyahu from doing it, or for as yet undisclosed reasons known only to Donald Trump himself. So Keir Starmer, along with the rest of the world, with the exception of Saudi Arabia, I suppose, wanted absolutely nothing to do with the attack upon Iran. And that is a complete observation of the Chilcot checklist. Iran then retaliated. And the retaliation, expectedly or unexpectedly, is moot, involved attacks upon British allies, who then invoked treaty obligations to which the United Kingdom was party, and therefore the Prime Minister arrived at his decision-making table with a different set of facts in front of him. Because asking to use British air bases to launch an at least ill-advised and at worst profoundly illegal war is a very different question from allowing British air bases to be used to discharge treaty obligations to British allies, which is what happened. So he approached the Chilcot checklist and the 10 points on it from different positions on both occasions. To hear Kemi Badenoch describe that as a U-turn is, well, it would be funny if the stakes weren't so high. And of course, the reason why it's not so funny is because I honestly don't think she actually understands the awfulness of her own argument. The idea that the same question was asked, can we use your bases to launch an illegal war, is somehow the same question as, can we use your bases to help you discharge treaty obligations to allies in the Middle East after attacks upon them and even attempted attacks upon British positions as well? They are two such completely different propositions that I struggle to believe that anybody can be daft enough not to understand that until I hear those people talk, sometimes to each other. And then you get, the third or the fourth question about whether or not you will get more involved now, whether or not you will support the mooted blockade, which is now fewer than 3 hours away, whether or not you will allow UK aircraft carriers to go and blast their way through the Strait of... At every single turn, Keir Starmer has actually got it right. But the reason why I mention criticism coming in from both sides, and it's criticism entirely contingent upon a failure to understand those different criteria for decision-making, is that he's getting almost as much jip as far as I can see, and it's difficult to get a clear picture on this because social media is far from an objective arbiter of truth. But there appears to be a lot of chatter on the left, even as he is attacked by Donald Trump for refusing to get involved in his illegal war. There's a lot of chatter on the left accusing him of being complicit in Donald Trump's illegal war. Now, I don't know whether we should be more generous to people on the left for not being able to understand the evidence of their own eyes and ears, or less generous. And I think in the past I've leant towards less generous for entirely partisan reasons, probably, and reasons of my own prejudice. If you lean towards the left and you genuinely don't understand the difference between Keir Starmer answering question 1 and Keir Starmer answering question 2, then you are probably more culpable than the people on the right who at least have the benefit of political partisanship to explain their ignorance. He has called it absolutely right. at every single turn. But there are people on the right pretending not to understand that or failing to understand that, and there are people on the left pretending not to understand that or failing to understand that. To the people on the left and to the people on the right, I would say, what is Trump so angry about? If Keir Starmer is not calling this correctly, if Keir Starmer has not successfully kept the United Kingdom out of Donald Trump's illegal war, what is Donald Trump so angry about? This is the question I'd like to see some figures making this point simply asked. Why is he so furious? Why is he reserving more vitriol and unpleasantness and personal ad hominem, unhinged ad hominem attacks? Why is he being much, much ruder to Keir Starmer than to anybody else, even as people on the left of British politics argue that Keir Starmer has followed Donald Trump into war? I genuinely find it baffling. But what I want you to tell me is whether or not you think that this is going to have any impact whatsoever. And remember, we can't talk about the council elections because we're in Purdah already, but we can talk about Keir Starmer's broader political fortunes. Is this actually going to make any difference? We've had a Prime Minister in the last month who has demonstrated leadership on a scale that we'd forgotten what it looks like, refusing to follow an American president, no questions asked, as Tony Blair did, and as Boris Johnson would have done, and as Kemi Badenoch would do, and as Nigel Farage would have gone much, much further, of course. Keir Starmer was resolute. He stood firm. He pursued a policy of trying to keep Donald Trump sweet. It hasn't blown up in his face or backfired. He succeeded in keeping Donald Trump sweet for as long as he succeeded in keeping Donald Trump sweet. And then he didn't. And that was always going to happen, as everybody will discover. Probably Mark Rutte at some point will discover, if he doesn't understand this already, and I think he probably does, that sycophancy is only ever a temporary position to hold. But sometimes it's the only position you can hold because the person you're being sycophantic to is so powerful. Keir Starmer has got this absolutely right. And I want you to tell me whether or not you think that is going to make the blindest bit of difference to his popularity. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's extraordinary to think after the last 16 years, really, that we have a Prime Minister in Downing Street capable not only of pursuing an independent course, but of standing up to the United States of America, ignoring the sabre-rattling and warmongering of 80% of the UK media, and reflecting entirely upon what is legal, what is just, and what is in the British interest. And he will get, I fear, and this is where I'd love you to contradict me or indeed to prove me wrong, but this is where I fear he will probably get next to no credit whatsoever. It's going to take a cycle of history. It's going to take the books to be written about what has gone on for the quality of Keir Starmer's contribution to this crisis to be fully appreciated. And it is not, I don't think, going to be appreciated in this country by British voters, unless you can persuade me otherwise. So, Keir Starmer has played an absolute blinder. You can challenge that analysis, of course you can, but remember, if you're going to challenge it from the position of he's complicit in Donald Trump's war, you need to tell me why Donald Trump is so angry with him. Is it going to make the blindest bit of difference to Keir Starmer's political fortunes? Is he going to get in this mad Brexity ecosystem that we have created in this country? Is he going to get any credit whatsoever for the unalloyed brilliance of his leadership during this crisis? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 12 is the time. This Southport inquiry, I can tell you, contains some pretty damning findings from Sir Adrian Fulford, who is currently sharing the findings of Phase 1, the Phase 1 report into that attack in Southport on the 29th of July 2024. If he can get out of Liverpool Town Hall, I'd be keen to get Chris Chambers on the show to tell you what is going on a little sooner than scheduled, so we may swap the two scheduled contributors around and get Chris on after past and speak to Dan Nolan about how Viktor Orbán built an ideological network here in the United Kingdom that you may know nothing about, or at least not enough. But the question I'd like you to turn your attention to before that is whether or not we live in a country where the Prime Minister will get any political credit whatsoever for quite wonderful, it's not a word I ever use to describe politicians, but I was thinking about it a lot while I was away, for getting every single thing right from the moment Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump launched their war against Iran. Because I've got a horrible feeling he won't. I don't fully understand why, so we'll add that question to the list as well. But do you think he will get any credit for this whatsoever? 12:21 is the time. Hugo is in Northampton. Hugo, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. How are you?
Very well, mate. What's on your mind?
Unfortunately, I don't think this will have any impact on Starmer's popularity. I think I agree with you. He's performed really well throughout this whole crisis, but fundamentally, every single voter is going to be thinking about this impact on his pocket.
And he could end up getting the blame for the thing that he resisted.
Blame might be the wrong word.
Okay.
I think there will be a lot of apathy for it. Because if we look back at Ukraine and we look back at COVID, there was legitimate blame on Putin, on COVID, for struggles in the economy. But due to how many times that was repeated, people got bored of hearing it. People wanted action. I understand there's nothing Starmer can do without getting involved, and I don't want him to get involved. But he needs to avoid, if he were to switch focus to measurable things he could do here, then I think that could improve his popularity. What do I mean by that? Well, every time we have one of these energy crises, we say we're going to scale back our EV mandates, we're going to scale back our renewable mandates, we're going to drill the gas, or at least that's what we've heard from the right parties on the right. But that is kicking the can down the road, because let's say we get 20% of our gas and energy from the North Sea, then we've got 80% still reliant on foreign powers. If you were to instead increase EV schemes, increase heat pump schemes, get more energy in renewables, and we could see our energy bills and our petrol or our fuel bills going down, I think that would really
I'm just going to point out you're hopping on a hobby horse, Hugo. Oh, that was a beautiful alliteration, wasn't it? But this is clearly something you feel very passionate about. Therefore, you will no doubt be celebrating the fact that inquiries into heat pumps, inquiries into solar panels, inquiries into electric vehicles are rising exponentially with every dot and comma of the current crisis, even as right-wing media and right-wing politicians pretend to believe that somehow drilling for more oil in the North Sea would change anything substantive, let alone long-term or permanent. But if you know, I suppose Iraq was a legacy after he left power, wasn't it? If Keir Starmer had acted differently, if he had followed Trump into this war and the war had turned out to be as disastrous as it has turned out to be, then the damage done to him would be considerable. It seems a little unfair that avoiding that delivers whatever the opposite of damage is, he gets none of. He gets nothing out of this.
Opportunity cost, right?
Yeah.
I think, you know, I don't know. Don't get me wrong, I do not want to be our Prime Minister right now, but I think, to improve the popularity, then it's, you need to move away from what we can do overseas and what we can do back here.
Yeah, maybe. And so it doesn't matter, even though it is by far the biggest story in the world at the moment, and our Prime Minister has. I used to say it about Boris Johnson. I don't know whether you remember this. I almost feel guilty for reminding you, but as he presided over one of the worst responses to COVID that the world saw during that period, all of his cheerleaders in the media and his own party were announcing that he got all the big calls right, including, I imagine, but I haven't checked recently, Kemi Badenoch. And yet here is Keir Starmer genuinely getting all the big calls right and poised to get, if Hugo is correct and if my suspicions, which tally with his, are confirmed, no credit whatsoever for this. Is it simply because, as Hugo suggests, we are concerned only with more immediate domestic matters? What if he does preside over a coalition of 30 countries that succeed in getting the Strait of Hormuz open? That might make a difference to the needle. It might nudge the needle. I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be shocked if it didn't. From Northampton to Southampton. That's quite felicitous. Nick is there. Nick, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello.
Yeah, I'd like to say I think he would get some credit, and I think he will get some credit from the British public for this, and he deserves some, because I've been a Conservative voter most of my life, and when all this kicked off, I was nervous for him, and I thought, well, how's he going to handle this? Because Trump's a difficult character to deal with. But as you said, I think he's balanced things in the best possible way he can, and he's taken the insults from Trump, the humiliations, the jibes on social media, and he's rolled with the punches. And I take my hat off to that and give him credit for it.
Yeah, do you know, one of the strangest things about Keir Starmer that I've been told, and I was told it on the programme, is that he used to get into a lot of fights when he was a younger man, when he was at school. And his younger brother, Nick, I think, had special educational needs. So I imagine, and this is entirely speculative, that a lot of the fights he got into were in defence of his brother, because, you can remember what schools were like in the 1970s when it came to pointing out differences. And I think it's one of the most under-acknowledged facets of his character, actually, because he can come across as a little bit stumbling and a little bit hesitant sometimes. But if you're someone that we took calls from a lad, I remember, who was talking about, all I really remember him from school was that he got into a lot of fights. He doesn't mind a fight. I can't see him starting fights, but if someone else swings at him, he's kind of ready for it. So he's really rolled with the punches from Donald Trump, hasn't he?
He has. Yeah, I've been impressed by it, I must say. I feared for how it was going to turn out, but to say I take my hat off to him and say he's actually handled it as well as anyone could have done. I mean, if Kenny Badenoch had been, heaven forfend what would have happened.
I don't even know what... You know what the really sad thing is? She doesn't know either, mate. There's no earthly way she could tell you what she would have done in the event of her being Prime Minister at the moment of Donald Trump's commencement of hostilities against Iran, because she's already changed the story about what she did as Leader of the Opposition while accusing Keir Starmer of a U-turn. And Nigel Farage, meanwhile, and this is something that I actually had to double-check, because I thought even by his standards of disingenuousness, this would be a bridge too far. And I don't believe that this was just something he recorded for money on Cameo. I believe this is something that he actually said to journalists. As the reality of Donald Trump's war in Iran becomes ever harder to ignore, he told the Financial Times on Friday, "I happen to know him, but that's by the by." This is Nigel Farage, who previously said, of course, that Donald Trump was the bravest man he had ever met, who's been photographed with him more times than... I can't think of anything funny to say at this point because it's nearly 12:30, but who has boasted about his friendship with Donald Trump, who offered to be an ambassador to the United States because his relationship with Donald Trump was so close and so intimate, who has opened for Donald Trump at various Republican Party and presidential conventions, a man who has made enormous political capital about his proximity to the deranged liar and self-confessed sex offender. Nigel Farage at the weekend seeking to minimise his personal relationship with Trump, writes the Financial Times, saying, "I happen to know him, but that's by the by." What do you think he would have done when Netanyahu and Trump launched this hideous war? And the question remains, will Keir Starmer get any credit for the course that he pursued instead? Thank you, Nick. Actually, Nick, before you go, I ask you this only because you're in Southampton. Are you a maritime man? Are you a naval man yourself?
Not especially.
No, glad to hear it. I just thought that might have provided a dimension of expertise to the sort of military aspect of what has and has not happened. It's coming up to 12:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I think next we will cross to Chris Chambers, who has been listening to the Phase 1 report into those murders in Southport, and then we'll move on a little later in the hour to the extraordinary spider's web of influence that the ousted Hungarian Prime Minister exercised over this country. But first, Tim Humphrey, how's your headlines?
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:33 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Chris Chambers, LBC's correspondent in Liverpool, has been in the town hall this afternoon where the Phase 1 report of the Southport inquiry has been unveiled, and he joins me from the steps of the town hall now. Chris, what have we learned?
Good afternoon, James. Yeah, this report states that this attack could and should have been prevented. It states it was clear from December 2019 that Axel Ruda-Cabana was extremely dangerous after taking a knife into school with a premeditated intention of killing a fellow pupil. But the chair of this inquiry, Sir Adrian Fulford, highlights critical failures in information sharing by those who were monitoring him, an absence by authorities to take ownership of the risk he posed, and said his trajectory towards grave violence was signposted repeatedly and unambiguously, yet the systems and agencies responsible did not act with the cohesion, urgency or clarity required. Essentially, he says agencies repeatedly passed the buck, not taking responsibility, says nobody seemed to know who was in charge, who was leading on managing the risk, and that this failure lies at the heart of why he was able to carry out the attack. We can hear from the chair, Sir Adrian Fulford.
This attack was perpetrated by a young person who it was known was potentially highly dangerous. He had carried a knife, including most particularly to school, on multiple previous occasions, and he had unemotionally and repeatedly admitted, long before the events of the 29th of July, that he had done so intending to kill or to cause others really serious harm. His parents and multiple officials from a wide range of relevant organisations knew this, albeit at differing levels of detail. Rigorously putting out of mind the so-called benefits of hindsight, I have no doubt that if appropriate procedures had been in place and if sensible steps had been taken by the agencies and AR's parents, this dreadful event would not have happened. It could have been, and it should have been, prevented.
The report also highlights significant parental failures, that they didn't provide boundaries for him, that they permitted knives and weapons to be delivered to their home, and failed to report crucial information in the days leading up to the attack. Sir Adrian Fulford added if the full extent of the family concerns had been shared with authorities, including on the day of the attack, it's almost certain this tragedy would have been prevented. There were other key areas highlighted as fundamental failures as well, critically in information sharing, but also misunderstanding of autism, that his conduct was wrongly attributed to his autism spectrum disorder, leading to inaction and a failure to address his dangerous behaviours, and a lack of oversight of online activity. In particular, we know he was researching school shootings while at school, asking about downloading graphic and violent imagery, and that was never passed on. We can hear more now from the chair on that.
From his early teens, he had become ever more fixated on extreme violence. I have no doubt at all that this disturbing preoccupation had been fed during the many years when, wholly unsupervised and lacking any parental controls, he spent the majority of his waking hours online. The strong indications are that he fueled his perversely violent fixation by viewing a wide range of deeply inappropriate and disturbing subjects that are all too available on the internet.
The chair goes on to say the frankly depressing and therefore urgent matter requiring government attention is the failure at an organisational level, an individual level, to stand up and accept responsibility for managing the risk he posed. Far too often, he says, his case was passed from public sector agency to another in an inappropriate merry-go-round of referrals. And we've been speaking to the Prime Minister today, who's been speaking about this.
We had the inquiry in order to look at the fundamental questions, and I intend to act on them. We owe it to all of those who've been so impacted on this. So in due course we can go through the detail and we can discuss that. But this is an in-principle position as far as I'm concerned. We set this up to get to look at what the fundamental problems were, where there were gaps and weaknesses and failures. It's our duty to act on them, and we will.
I know that the hearing concluded with a minute's silence in memory of the 3 young girls who were murdered, Chris. But what will phase 2 involve, and what sort of timescale do we expect it to follow?
That's right, yeah. Phase 2 will consider the adequacy of multi-agency systems to address the risk posed by young people whose fixation or obsession with and desire to commit acts of extreme violence presents a significant risk to public safety, you know, what those kind of concerns are and what the risk is going forward. But this report in itself is 760 pages long. There will be much more forensic analysis of it, and we'll hear Phase 2 at a later date.
Chris, thank you. Chris Chambers, LBC's correspondent in Liverpool, reporting on the Phase 1 report of the Southport inquiry, finding, if you missed any of that, 5 key areas or 5 key fundamental problems amid a conclusion that the attack was both foreseeable and avoidable, which, sometimes you're on the radio, you almost get ambushed by your own parenthood. But what will the parents of Elsie, Bibi and Alice be going through today as they learn that the murder could have been or indeed was both foreseeable and avoidable? But those 5 major areas of systemic failure: absence of risk ownership, no agency or multi-agency structure, accepted responsibility for assessing and managing the grave risk posed by the perpetrator. Critical failures in information sharing, essential information repeatedly lost, diluted or poorly managed across those agencies. A misunderstanding of autism is in there as well. AR, which is the initials of the killer. AR's conduct was wrongly attributed to his autism spectrum disorder, leading to inaction and a failure to address dangerous behaviours, leading also, this is me speaking now, not the inquiry, to some rather ignorant commentary upon the nature of autism spectrum disorder itself, which was profoundly unhelpful. Point 4, problem 4, lack of oversight of online activity. So the online behaviour of AR, providing the clearest indications of his violent preoccupations, never meaningfully examined. And finally, the significant parental failures. AR's parents not providing boundaries, permitting knives and weapons to be delivered to the home, and failing to report crucial information in the days leading up to his attack. So, loosely and briefly, the authorities, the internet and the parents taking the blame for the failure to properly act when the murder was foreseeable and avoidable. But the responsibility ultimately for the murders, of course, will always lie with AR. More on that, and no doubt more coverage of this throughout the day on LBC, and quite possibly tomorrow. 12:41 is the time. I hesitate to say this because the territory is so fraught and so horrible, but remember, it was off the back of these killings that the Farage riots were launched up and down this country a couple of summers ago, a couple of summers ago, and so no doubt some people will be seeking to make political capital out of the... And I resisted the urge myself to talk about cuts and austerity, actually, because now is not the moment, but the absence of risk ownership, the critical failures in information sharing, the misunderstanding of autism, the lack of oversight on online activity, and the significant parental failures. I can't currently see how the usual suspects will try to turn that into a political football, but I bet you 50p they do. 12:41 is the time. Back to, speaking of political footballs, back to Keir Starmer and his, I think, frankly, almost unbelievably good performance during the hideous war against Iran launched by Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, but the rather grim fear, conclusion, suspicion that he'll get no credit for it whatsoever. And not just because so much of our media and political establishment is so bent, but also because of, I don't know what. Hugo suggested the fact that it is an international issue and it doesn't have immediate wins in place, and the cost of fuel is going to go up. Cost of everything is going to go up as a consequence of this war. But Starmer has handled it brilliantly. He's also showing international leadership. It's been a very, very long time since the UK was anywhere close to that phrase. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he will get some credit. But if he's not going to, why? Steve's in Crouch End. Steve, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I think he is currently getting credit and will continue to get a lot more. I think it's very difficult to read the mood of the country. But the way I the way I've discovered to read the mood of the country is by watching Gogglebox. They predicted
Sounds pretty good to me.
Ed Miliband would lose the election, and they were right.
Yes.
And I didn't understand it. To me, that's a great cross-section. Yeah, I mean, Keir Starmer. Do you remember?
What are they saying on Gogglebox about this?
Well, I don't know if they've got a recent series going on, but if they had, they would be the people to watch. But I don't know if you remember Diary of a Nobody. I'm sure you probably do.
Yes,
but you know, Keir Starmer he's a sort of charisma-less character. You know, but that's quite a useful thing in these current times, and I think he's the mouse that roared right now because. The war in the Middle East is obviously a total financial disaster for us and everybody else. Petrol, diesel, everything's going up. I know quite a few people. I spoke to them yesterday who buy and sell oil. They're making an absolute fortune, and they will continue to do so. And I think the fact that he hasn't necessarily publicly stood up to Donald Trump, but he said about Trump and Putin that he's fed up with them launching these wars because
he hasn't entered into a war of name calling. But he has said no.
He's more mature, though.
Yes, I completely agree. I mean, I suppose I'm just so used to disappointment, despite the events in Hungary yesterday, that I'm not expecting good behaviour, good conduct, good politics to get a reward from the British electorate. But you could be right.
Can I just suggest one thing, though? It's easy to get misled. A, watch Gogglebox, and B, don't get misled by the populist media, because just because the Daily Mail and the Telegraph are saying one thing, and that might lead the headlines on the Today programme, I don't think that's what the people watching Gogglebox or the general public...
No, nor do I anymore. Well, except for Brexit, I suppose, but that was 10 years ago now. And increasing, I don't think we over-egg the pudding when we point out, because they will be pretending, if they're not already, that this isn't true. But the calls for Starmer to go into that war were, I mean, one bloke in the Daily Mail, presumably Richard Littlejohn, was describing how he'd never been more ashamed to be British. Talking about how he'd rather be led by Donald Trump than Keir Starmer. I just mentioned that solely to reflect upon the clamour, the volume. You think about, if we think back to the Iraq War, it worked. It persuaded an entire population. Don't at me to tell me that it didn't persuade you, but it just doesn't work anymore.
Look, I supported the Iraq War. I was foolish. I regret it for the rest of my life. I think Tony Blair received all the amount of a programme he should have received, and it was an absolute disgrace. And what we've learned now is every time you try and unseat an authoritarian dictator, something worse happens. You know, even if Putin were to be unseated. But there's just one thing I'd just like to add, which is this.
Go on.
It doesn't seem apparent why Trump has invaded Iran, but I think it's pretty apparent why he's invaded Iran, and it's to do with the fact that the Israel lobby. I mean, I'm Jewish myself. I'm a sort of not really a Zionist, but if I had a neighbour that was 300 miles away that was about to acquire a nuclear weapon, it's the one. I mean, I think Netanyahu is absolutely disgraceful. Everything he's done is horrific. All he's trying to do is stay out of prison. But the one thing I actually agree with is trying to get rid of Iran's nuclear weapons. And clearly AIPAC in the States has persuaded Trump, who's fairly persuadable by the Jewish lobby, that this is what he needs to do.
I know you mentioned you're Jewish. I'm not comfortable with the phrase Jewish lobby. I'm more comfortable with the phrase Israeli lobby, or indeed just simply typifying AIPAC in that way. But the bit missing from your jigsaw is that if that were the case, then everybody would have been absolutely up in arms when Trump torched the agreement and the deal that Barack Obama's people negotiated, because that was delivering exactly. They don't have a nuclear program. They don't have a nuclear weapon, and they're not likely to get one anytime soon.
They've got 60% enriched uranium. That's what.
And that's what was subject to the treaty that Barack Obama negotiated and Donald Trump set fire to. So you can't really, or rather they, AIPAC or whatever you want to typify the people you're talking about as, they can't have it both ways. You have to be absolutely furious with what Donald Trump did in the first term, or you support what he did in the second term. You have to be both. You can't do one and not the other. In my view, Steve, thank you. Obviously, when Steve tells me that he's Jewish, I have no way of checking while we are live on the radio, but neither do I have any reason whatsoever to doubt him. The time is 12:47.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10 to 1, and everything is still bonkers, isn't it? It's funny, I stepped off a tiny little boat in the West Highlands of Scotland. I saw golden eagles. I saw sea eagles as well. I think there's only 60 pairs in the whole of the United Kingdom, and I got quite close to the sea eagles. No, not the eagles. I don't think they're on the road anymore, Keith, but I saw sea eagles. Picking up at the Hotel California. I had a wonderful time, but I got off this boat literally in the middle of nowhere, or on the edge of nowhere. And the first thing that this lovely bloke said to me was, look, I know you're probably here to get away from it all, but can I just say, I listen to your show every day and it keeps me sane. But what are you going to do when everything goes back to normal? And I said, people have been asking me that since 2016. They've been telling me that since 2016. It's a very kind thing for you to say to me. Obviously, I've got no way of knowing whether I am helping to keep you sane, because you might be as mad as a box of frogs. You're just hiding it well in that moment. But given that you were about to sail me over a Scottish lock, I'm glad that you turned out to be completely sane. But I don't know when things... What would it look like now? Would you recognise it if it happened? Were things a little bit more... No, they weren't. Were they normal under Joe Biden for a bit? Except we were still dealing with all the Brexit. No, we had COVID, well, kind of sub-truss and I mean, I don't even know. I would not know. Anyway, I digress. And I mentioned that as an opportunity to remind you that I wrote a book called How They Broke Britain, which is particularly useful at times like this because it explains how populations can be persuaded to do things that are entirely against their own interests. And yet I am somewhat embarrassed to tell you that there is an element of the creation of an ecosystem in which a country could be persuaded to act violently against its own interests, which I completely and utterly missed. Some of the people contained within this critique appear in How They Broke Britain, but I'm afraid I am dealing exclusively with monkeys, and I never trace them back to the organ grinder. For that, we turn now to Dan Nolan, an award-winning journalist who has been covering Hungary and matters Hungarian for the best part of 20 years and who wrote a piece for the rather splendid Democracy Now! Substack under the title How Orban Built an Ideological Network in the UK. Where do we begin, Dan? Do we begin in June of 2015?
June 2015, are we talking about the holograph?
We might well be, yes.
Yeah, well, I was just explaining to producer, I waited a decade to try and squeeze that into some intro or other. But yeah, that actually happened. Niall Ferguson gave a holographic lecture in Budapest, but was only 3 feet tall for the first few minutes.
And this is an indication of a world that most people in this country don't know about, even though they will, as with Niall Ferguson, a sort of hero historian of the right. They'll be familiar with much of the cast of characters, but they won't be aware of who the director of operations was.
Yeah, so that would be Viktor Orbán, the now former Prime Minister of Hungary since yesterday. And Orban has essentially built a pipeline where state revenues flow into a foundation called MCC, which has over €1.5 billion. Wow. And that money has paid British commentators contractual salaries. There's specific obligations in these contracts with the Hungarian government to place articles basically, pushing certain right-wing talking points. And some of the outlets are named specifically, for example, The Spectator, GB News, Unheard, The Critic.
So I put you on this payroll and you promised to get, or to try to get, articles published in these organs.
Yeah, that's right. There was a local muckraking site, really good one called Adlatso, and they got hold of 4 contracts, and we could see in that salaries are pretty good, but there are specific obligations to write articles, like I say, in specifically recommended outlets.
Good Lord. No suggestion, of course, that the editors of these outlets would be aware of what they were party to, unwittingly party to.
Yeah, no suggestion of that. No suggestion. That's open to speculation, I guess.
And what was in it for Orban? What was the sort of message he was seeking to spread?
Well, I mean, he was under a lot of pressure, from the EU and so on. So he would get people. This is something that happened gradually over the 16 years. He kind of got serious about it about 8 years in. And so for example, there might be a conference which is promoting sort of family values. And through that, then there would be a pipeline into the British media where someone would be praising the fact that he's given tax breaks to mothers of 2 children, or kind of preferential mortgages for newly married couples, and so on. So there was a specific group of, obviously with Viktor Orbán, anti-migration rhetoric, also anti-EU, sovereignty, the usual kinds of tropes. And they would sort of via this funnel go from Budapest to an Anglophone commenter into the British media.
And I suppose we should look at some of the Budapest. It's a Budapest-based think tank, the Danube Institute, but it employs mainly British and American fellows. Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, it was founded by John O'Sullivan, who's quite well known for being Margaret Thatcher's speechwriter in 2013. And, it's very well funded. It's had all kinds of speakers over the years, and also has a fellowship system. So various people have been fellows over the years. For example, Douglas Murray, Matt Goodwin. I'm not sure if he was an actual fellow. He's certainly a very regular visitor, and he's salaried, although he's denied that. And there was a famous incident when Tim Montgomery, who at the time was an advisor to Boris Johnson, kind of firebombed his career by talking at a Danube Institute event. And he was saying how it was interesting how Viktor Orbán is testing the limits of liberalism. So he said that in Budapest. And when he came back to the UK, then his contract was not renewed with Johnson.
I remember that. I think Montgomery subsequently joined Nigel Farage's latest outfit as well. But the
right, well, that does seem to be the way it goes. There's a lot of people who kind of start as Tories, but have now kind of shifted to reform. That does seem to be a general trend.
What happens now? It's a bit early to say. You're probably still recovering from the celebrations last night. But do these pipelines automatically get cut off?
Well, it depends. I mean, some of these institutions have been set up in a way specifically designed for a day like today, the day after Orban loses power. So, for example, the one you mentioned, James, the Danube Institute, the think tank, they can just pull the funding on that. So they can fairly quickly kill that. Whereas for example, with this kind of university they have, the MCC, that will be quite a litigious and lengthy operation to close it. So it depends. That's my maybe slightly unsatisfactory answer.
No, it's not unsatisfactory if it's accurate, but you're going to be, I presume, keeping a close eye on these developments as they somewhat unexpectedly, I don't think 12 months ago we thought we'd be where we are today, but as they begin to unfold, you will continue to unpick.
It's phenomenal what's happened actually in 2 years. Peter Magyar went from nothing to a 2/3 majority. Unbelievable. Nobody foresaw.
And that's key because that majority allows him to unpick the governance of some foundation. If he'd fallen below that threshold, he'd have not been able to do even the things that you've described him today as being capable of doing.
It makes the job a lot easier, but there are certain things. To quote you, actually, James, don't get a big head.
Too late.
It is. That's true. It is very much removing an egg from a baked cake, like something that happened in the UK 10 years ago. So for example, these foundations, like the MCC Foundation, this basically is a school to create the Orban elite. They were given a state endowment of 10% of the biggest company in Hungary, which is the oil company, and also 10% of the biggest pharmaceuticals, the drug maker as well. So they will have a steady income
That isn't going away anytime soon. Dan, you've taken me way past the news and Sheila's already here, but it's a testament to how rapt I am by what you're telling us and how much more I would like to know. Get yourself over to Democracy for Sale, not Democracy Now, as I ludicrously termed it a few moments ago. There's a clue in the title, Democracy for Sale, to find out more. And Dan, of course, a colleague of the inimitable Peter Gagan, who we often have the pleasure of hearing from. I'm short of time, so I just remind you to download the official LBC app, and that Tom Sawbrick will be with you at 4, and that Sheila Fogarty is with you now.
James O'Brien on LBC.